I had a dream, and then I turn on the lights, and she's dead on the floor. How? I might have blood all over me, and there's a bloody knife on the bed. And I think I did it. At around 1 a.m. on September 1st, 2017, a 911 dispatcher from Raleigh Police Department received a call from 28-year-old Matthew Phelps, who sounded a bit sedated. During the call, he claimed that he had accidentally stabbed his wife Lauren to death while he was dreaming. He then suddenly woke up and saw his wife lying in a pool of blood on the floor. I took more medicine than I should have. What medicine did you take? I took evening coughs and colds because I know it can make you feel good. So a lot of times I can't sleep at night. Is she breathing at all? Is her chest moving? Is anything going on with her? No. Okay. Well, we're gonna leave. The blood is dried on me. It's dried? The blood is not wet on me. The blood is dry. Not long after this portion of the phone call, Matthew admits to why he's acting so strangely and presents a reason for the slaying. Raleigh police arrived at Matthew's Patuxent Drive home in Raleigh just seconds after the 7-minute call. Matthew's wife, 29-year-old Lauren, was lying motionless on the floor. A blood-soaked knife was on the bed, and the cough medicine was laid out on the bathroom counter, supporting his claim for taking cough medicine. Though Lauren exhibited no signs of life, paramedics still took her to the hospital, where she was pronounced dead. Detectives were confused about whether it was a tragic accident or a planned murder, but they brought Matthew in for further questioning. The results of the autopsy performed on Lauren's corpse revealed gruesome details. Her body suffered 23 stab wounds. 44 of those were around her face, and the rest were on her head, neck, and arms. Although there was no doubt about who was responsible for Lauren's death, detectives were torn between the theory of her demise being a tragic accident or a planned murder. Hundreds of pictures on their social media accounts represented the couple's contented life together. Matthew did not have any criminal record. From the outside, they were a happy-go-lucky couple who had it all. The cough syrup theory could not be immediately discounted. After all, cough syrups, when taken in a high dosage, can cause euphoria, delusions, and dissociative phenomena, which often result in people acting strangely. In order to solve the mystery of this killing, investigators began to dive deep into the couple's history. Lauren Ashley Nicole Hugelmeyer was born on June 9, 1988 in Los Angeles County. In a tight-knit and religious family, Lauren had a picture-perfect childhood along with her two siblings, older sister Beth and younger sister Brianna. Lauren was known as an all-around happy person. She was known to be hardworking and studious. In February 2007, Lauren graduated from Swain County High School in North Carolina. Afterward, she graduated college with a degree in business administration and management in February 2011 from Appalachian State University. After completing her studies, she worked as an auditor at Quintiles. She also started her own business selling Scentsy products. I have a pre-order list that I can sell 5 of these starting today. So today until the 31st, I have a special offer for 5 people if you want in on one of these. She was very passionate about Scentsy, and her Facebook page was filled with photos and videos about her side business, including trips she took with others who sell the Scentsy products. Aside from that, Lauren was also an active member of Hope Lutheran Church and worked as a Sunday school teacher as part of her work with the church's children's and youth ministries. In her mid-20s, Lauren reconnected with one of her old classmates from middle school, Matthew Phelps. The two lost touch in high school since Matthew transferred and Lauren's family eventually moved to Raleigh, North Carolina. While Lauren grew up in a loving home, Matthew had not been so fortunate. Matthew did not have any close bonds with his family. He was primarily raised by his grandparents because his parents neglected their responsibilities. His parents separated after his birth. While his biological father was entirely absent from his life, his mother was also rarely around. His mother remarried a few times, but Matthew never formed a father and son type bond with any of his stepfathers. His grandparents tried their best to provide him with love and care, but there was not enough to fill the vacant place in his heart. This dynamic may have been what caused him to start acting out from an early age. Whether his living conditions affected his mind or not, Matthew started hanging out with the wrong crowd and began abusing drugs and alcohol in his high school years. Matthew and his friends were known to have often consumed quercetin, the same medicine that he was now claiming to have taken before attacking his wife. High amounts of quercetin caused a high which Matthew and his friends took advantage of. This addiction began to spiral out of control, and as a result, Matthew's grandparents were eventually forced to take Matthew out of public high school and put him in a private Christian academy to try to get his life back on the right track. This worked well for Matthew. He started getting better grades in school and eventually graduated. He then attended the Clear Creek Baptist Bible College in Pineville, Kentucky, and seemed to have significantly improved from his early high school years to eventually graduating college in February 2011. It was Matthew who stumbled upon Lauren's photos and realized that they both knew each other. After hesitating for a bit, Matthew reached out to Lauren through Instagram. He liked every picture of Lauren that was ever posted. The two began catching up, and as such things often go, the texts soon transitioned to long late-night phone calls. Before long, both Matthew and Lauren fell head over heels for each other. The two began a long-distance relationship since Matthew was still living in Kentucky at the time. Despite living hundreds of miles away from each other, the relationship between them began to progress very quickly. It did not take long before Matthew made the effort to visit Lauren in Raleigh. Eventually, he moved back to North Carolina to be with her. Being so close to her family, Lauren was excited to introduce Matthew to everyone. Most of her family welcomed Matthew with open arms, trusting Lauren's choices. They saw him as a kind and well-behaved man who genuinely cared for their daughter. Lauren's mother, Lori, thought him to be the perfect fit for her daughter. However, Lauren's father Dale was skeptical about the relationship. Perhaps it was just a father's protectiveness for his daughter, or maybe a gut feeling, but as far as Dale was concerned, Matthew was moving way too fast and possibly hiding secrets from Lauren. Yet, he could not put his finger on what exactly it was about Matthew that gave him that uneasiness. He decided to set his feelings aside because his daughter seemed so happy. In time, Matthew became part of the family. Dale's suspicions were finally taking shape when Matthew dropped a bombshell at the dinner table during a visit to Lauren's parents' house for a game night. He confessed to having a failed marriage prior to dating Lauren, but refused to share any other details. This raised questions about his integrity and intention, as not only had he already been divorced at such a young age, but also he hid the fact for months into his new relationship. And more than words, it was his body language that looked sketchy to Lauren's family. Nevertheless, Lauren loved him with all her heart and didn't seem to mind any of his actions, so the family offered their support when they progressed to the next step in their relationship. The couple finally got engaged in February 2015. The engagement party was remembered as one of a kind by her family and friends. Matthew's mother, whom the family described as problematic, did not really like Lauren. She even went to the point of purposefully wearing a white dress to the wedding to make her feelings known. However, the event went off without a hitch, and the couple tied the knot the following year. The pair incorporated the Star Wars theme in their wedding since they were both huge fans of the franchise. Both Lauren and Matthew seemed to be on top of the world as they started their new journey together. For Lauren, married life was a dream come true. She had her own house, a job that she put all of her efforts into, and a husband who always knew how to make her smile. However, the dream marriage soon began to transform into an ugly reality as Matthew began to show his true colors just a few months into their marriage. Matthew was having a hard time finding jobs, and when he did find a job, he'd soon leave the job with little to no explanation. In addition to that, he idly spent most of his time playing video games while Lauren had to work multiple jobs to run the household. According to Lauren's family, whom she often confided in, this put a strain on their finances. But that wasn't the only factor putting financial strain on Lauren. Matthew was overspending on fancy electronic gadgets and gaming equipment while Lauren was focusing on tightening their purse strings. He spent $1,200 on iTunes and Xbox subscriptions for his video gaming. He'd even go to the extent of stealing money out of Lauren's purse if she ever refused to pay for his frivolous lifestyle. Lauren had approximately $10,000 in her bank account before getting married to Matthew, but by the time of her death it had dwindled to only $1,000. There were other problems in the relationship besides just Matthew's spending habits. While visiting Matthew's family home with them 6 months after the couple got married, not only did his mother give Lauren the cold shoulder, but she and Matthew fought the whole time. She felt like an outcast in their home. Naturally, the reasons behind most of the fights were in regard to Matthew's money-spending habits, which prevented them from pursuing things they wanted to do together. As mentioned earlier, the couple was a big fan of Star Wars, and they were trying to save money for a trip to Disney World. However, Matthew would spend whatever little was saved on his own selfish habits, never allowing the couple to get ahead. Additionally, Lauren was suspicious that Matthew had had an extramarital affair with their neighbor, whom Matthew regularly spent time with. There was an instance when Lauren was on the phone with her elder sister Beth while cooking dinner for Matthew. After coming back from work, he went out to hang out with the neighbor and left a text for Lauren stating that he was having way too much fun with the neighbor and that Lauren should have dinner without him. Although Matthew spent a lot of time with their neighbor, he was extremely possessive of Lauren. There were multiple fights regarding a man at their church who Matthew thought was hitting on Lauren. Matthew distrusted Lauren, which caused even more distance between them. Matthew justified his insecurities by recounting the story of how his ex-wife left him after meeting another man on a missionary trip. For obvious reasons, his justifications would not solve anything as their relationship was on a downward spiral. Lauren had opened up to loved ones on multiple occasions about her desire to leave her controlling husband less than a year into their marriage. However, because of her religious beliefs, she was adamant about making the marriage work and tried to push divorce to the back of her mind as a last resort. Despite all of their issues, Lauren still tried to present a perfect marriage to the outside world. On every platform of social media, she continued to post pictures and videos of themselves, accompanied by sugary sweet captions expressing their love. Yet that was in stark contrast to what was actually happening behind closed doors. Eventually, Matthew decided to go back to college to become a pastor for their church in an attempt to keep their marriage afloat. However, Lauren was not significantly impressed with this effort. In fact, fed up with his inconsiderate and immature behavior, Lauren was finally on the verge of leaving Matthew, but she would never have the chance to follow through with that decision. Instead, she was brutally murdered by her husband in their marital bed. With all this history, it did not take long to put the puzzle pieces together. They all concurred that everything about the crime scene looked way too staged. Not only were the knife and the coffer perfectly set out in certain positions, but Matthew had almost no blood on him aside from some on his shoes and a few drops on his shirt. This was not consistent with someone who had stabbed a person 23 times. It looked as though Matthew had attempted to clean himself up, which contradicts his claims of being in a delusional state. Luminal tests performed around their apartment showed that there were traces of blood everywhere which had been cleaned up before authorities could see it. Investigators now recalled how Matthew had shown no emotions when they arrived at the crime scene. Subsequently, Bayer, the maker of Carucidin, released a statement saying that there was no evidence to suggest that Carucidin is associated with violent behavior. Additionally, a medical report suggested that at the time of the murder, his body contained a very low amount of the drug, and it was unlikely to have impacted his reasoning at all. However, Matthew opted to stick to his alibi about the cough syrup and did not change his story. So, investigators started digging deeper for more evidence. Upon delving further into Matthew's motives, the investigators found a journal where he wrote about all the troubles he was having with Lauren. He went on and on about his low esteem and insecurities in his relationship with Lauren. Despite Lauren's best efforts, Matthew never felt he fit in well with her family. The neighbor with whom Lauren had suspected Matthew of having an affair with told police that they were just friends and bonded over their struggles with anxiety and depression. She also shared that as they continued spending time together, Matthew began talking about more morbid subjects such as suicide and death. Perhaps he intended to get his hands on the licensed and concealed gun he knew she had in her home. Additionally, after gaining access to his phone, investigators discovered his concerning search history. He had searched for odd things, such as how loopy does Carucidin make you? Or have other people been high from Carucidin? Looking solely at these Google searches, one could surmise that this murder was premeditated, and he was already planning on using the cough medicine as a defense. However, this circumstantial evidence was not enough to build a solid case against him. Yet soon another discovery came to light. Matthew had a secret Instagram account at Marty_Radical where he posted dark images from the movie American Psycho and pictures of him dressed as Patrick Bateman, the lead character of the movie. Apparently, Matthew was obsessed with serial killers and expressed to a friend that he was curious about what it would feel like to kill someone. Right before he murdered Lauren, he posted an Instagram photo with a caption saying, "Everyone thinks I'm a serial killer. #found an angel to kill." The account contained numerous posts that discussed the devil and demons. Finally, it was time to bring the matter to trial. Prosecutors were confident that they had enough evidence to implicate Matthew and his wife's intentional murder. However, Matthew's defense argued in court that this wasn't in Matthew's character, and that he was in an unstable and depressed mental state when the murder occurred. With everybody so that we can all together get to the bottom of this really significant tragic. To support the claim, they presented a few letters from Matt's co-workers to the judge insisting that this was not in Matthew's character. The prosecution brought Matthew's ex-wife to the stand. Contradicting Matthew's previous claims of her cheating on him, she revealed that it was Matthew who cheated on her multiple times throughout their marriage. Like Lauren, she seemed to have similar issues in her marriage to Matthew. These included Matthew not working, spending way too much money, and not contributing anything to their dreams together, which ended up causing the separation. Matthew ultimately accepted a plea deal and pleaded guilty to first-degree murder to avoid the death penalty he was initially facing. In completing guilty to one offense, that's the offense of first-degree murder. It is a felony that carries the maximum penalty of death or life without the possibility of parole. Do you understand that? Yes, sir. Do you personally plead guilty to the charge I just described? Yes, sir. And did you, in fact, murder your wife, Lauren Phelps, by stabbing her multiple times? Yes, sir. The matter finally came to a conclusion on October 5, 2018, when Matthew was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After sentencing, Matthew read an apology to Lauren's family. "I'm sorry that I took away Lauren's life, a life that was deeply connected to so many people." However, his apology fell on deaf ears as her family said that it meant nothing to them. "Never. I'll take him to my grave, and I'll still hate him. There's no way. No man can do that to any human being." They stated that they could never forgive him for his thoughtless actions. They shared in a statement, "He was luring all of us into a trap by taking advantage of our kindness and generosity. We never once thought Lauren was in danger." To this day, Lauren's family feels a sense of blame for not intervening when they knew the relationship had taken a turn for the worse. To help others like their beloved Lauren, they've put together an organization called Lauren's Light, which raises awareness for abusive relationships and domestic violence. On June 8, 2012, Vancouver Police Department in Canada received a desperate call from a 25-year-old Chinese exchange student Lianji Gua. The caller said that his mother, 47-year-old Lianji Gua, who was there visiting him, went missing just one day before she was supposed to return to her home country of China. She was particularly vulnerable because of her inability to speak or even understand English, her native tongue being Cantonese. Lianji and her husband, Tang Juehe, went to Vancouver, Canada 20 days prior to visit her son, Yuan Tang, who was studying at Douglas College in Canada. They rented a B&B and made lots of plans for the three of them to spend time together as a family. Yuan was excited to show his parents around his new city. After a wonderful visit with their son, it was time for Tang Juehe and Lianji to go back home. They had a flight scheduled to China on the afternoon of June 7, 2012. According to Yuan's statement, on the morning of their flight, Yuan made his way to the rented apartment to pick up his parents to go to the airport, but his father was still sleeping. As there was still plenty of time, Yuan decided to let him sleep in and took his mother for breakfast at a restaurant. After breakfast, they returned to the B&B where he began loading all of their luggage into his car. He could see his mother watching him from the window as he was loading the luggage. He stated he then went to a nearby mall to make a purchase. But shockingly, when he returned, his mother was nowhere to be found. Yuan woke his father up to inquire about his mother's whereabouts. Initially, they weren't all that concerned. They assumed that Lianji had just stepped outside for a minute and couldn't have been very far. After unsuccessfully trying to reach her by phone, they waited for some time, expecting her to come back. After a few hours, when she did not show up, they went to look for her. They searched around the city for quite some time with no luck. Since the flight was for that afternoon, Oan and his father headed to the airport, thinking she may have caught a cab there. Unfortunately, she wasn't there either. As the airport announced the boarding of their flight, Tang Zuhi was torn between going back home and searching for his wife. However, Yuan reassured him that it must have been a simple mix-up, and that he'd be thoroughly searching for her, and send her home once she was found. Tang Zueha returned home after a 13-hour flight filled with confusion and anxiety. His wife's seat beside him remained empty. Unable to find his mother, Yuan called the police the following morning. An investigation was launched immediately in an attempt to find Lianji. When they reached the scene, they did not find anything suspicious. However, police speculated that Lianji was trying to illegally stay in Canada and did not want to return home. However, this theory was filled with holes. Yuan's family ran a very successful furniture transport business, making them very well off. They had customers across the world, including the US, Europe, and Southeast Asia. While Tang Zuihe visited his son often during business trips, Lianji was visiting Vancouver for the first time. She had no history of any addiction, mental instability, affairs, or known enemies. There was really no reason for her to want to illegally stay in Canada. This theory was eventually thrown out when Lianji's belongings, including her money, passport, and handbag, were discovered in Yuan's car. Fearing that she may have been abducted by someone, Yuan set out on a mission to find his mother. He handed out flyers with his mother's picture and details. He also gave interviews and held press conferences to spread awareness about his mother's disappearance in hopes of getting significant information. His father soon returned to Vancouver to assist in the investigation and search for his wife. The public, especially the Chinese community, was moved by the story of the father and son who were desperate to find their loved one. Many locals volunteered in the search efforts. Meanwhile, the police continued their investigation. But for days, the search yielded no results. There were no ransom calls, which weakened the theory of kidnapping. At this point, when several days had passed with no new leads, cops were considering a much more sinister outcome. As a last resort, police began to look at this case from a different angle. They started looking closely at the family members. As they dug deeper, a strange piece of information caught their attention. Oddly, Juan had rented an apartment in the same B&B in which his parents were staying, but failed to ever mention this to authorities. All this time police believed Joaquin was living in his own apartment and came to visit with his parents from time to time during their stay. Now it looked as though he was staying just next door to them the entire time. When police questioned Joe and regarding this, he simply said, "You didn't ask me. I didn't say." Upon further questioning as to why he rented a room in the B&B when he already had a rented apartment nearby, he justified it by saying he intended to spend as much time as possible with his parents. Although this bit of information did not prove that Yuan had anything to do with his mother's disappearance, his nonchalant attitude was enough to raise suspicion. Investigators also noticed that Yuan was also trying to downplay his English-speaking skills, avoiding some questions along the way, which also seemed strange considering his 6 years of study in Canada. At this time, investigators started to look at Yuan as a person of interest. There was another anomaly in his story. He first told the police that his mother was alone and went missing from the B&B, but later changed his story and said they went to have breakfast and from there she went missing. He again changed his story later and said she was in his apartment and disappeared from there. Shocked by Yuan's lies, Tang Zuihe asked him why he would do such a thing. Yuan told him that he did this to save his landlord from legal trouble, since his landlord illegally divided the rent, and had done him a favor by not calling the cops into his apartment. Though the excuse sounded lame, Tang Zui wanted to put all his efforts into finding his wife instead of arguing with his son. But police started digging deeper for clues. They interrogated the tenants in the B&B in Richmond, Vancouver, and they all said that the family got along really well. They hit a dead end, unable to gather any evidence. 2 weeks later, in a press conference, Tang Zuhi and Yuan said that although they could not rule out the possibility that something bad had happened, They were hopeful that Lianji was safe and sound and would be reunited with them soon. At that point, investigators were leaning toward homicide rather than a disappearance. With hopes of finding remains or any evidence, they beefed up their manpower and began sweeping the nearby wooded areas, but to no avail. Despite all efforts, there is practically no progress in the case. As the business back in China was falling apart, Tang Zui he had no option but to return home. Once again he was relying on his son to keep the search for his mother alive, which Yuan promised him he would do before persuading his father to go back. On July 20, 2012, Lianji's case was formally handed over to Canada's Integrated Homicide Investigation Unit. Detectives from IHIU believed from the start that Lianji's family members were involved in her disappearance and possible homicide. However, they were unsure whether it was Tang Juehe or Yuan Jitong who was the culprit. Looking at the inconsistencies in Yuan's statements, IHIU detectives zeroed in on him. When they went to search the B&B, they found traces of blood on the ceiling, walls, closet, and nightstand in the room that Yuan was previously staying in. They also found a massive spot of dried blood on the bed. The blood was taken into the lab for testing, but couldn't be determined who it belonged to. As the blood evidence alone wasn't enough, Yuan couldn't be apprehended. Detectives also wanted to search Yuan's apartment, but they did not have enough to get a search warrant and Yuan refused to let them in without one. July 20, 2012 marked 1.5 months from Lianji's disappearance. On the same day, police received a call regarding the finding of a suitcase containing human remains on the beach near Harwood Island, a 6-hour drive from Vancouver. When cops reached the scene, they discovered the corpse of a middle-aged Asian woman. Looking at her clothes, police immediately thought of the missing Lianji Gua. An autopsy later confirmed this. The results suggested that she died from multiple blows to her head. In her spine, 5 steel nails marked with Chinese words were found, which was consistent with the characteristics of Lianji, as she had spinal surgery recently. When genetic tests were performed, the corpse was officially identified as 47-year-old Lianji Gua. Unfortunately, there was no surveillance cameras in the areas where her body was found and therefore no way to know who left the suitcase on the beach. Meanwhile, RCMP took over the case and strategized to go undercover. They neither went public with the discovery nor did they inform Yuan. At the start of August 2012, an undercover female police officer of Chinese descent contacted Yuan and said she had some information about his mother. The Cantonese-speaking officer met Yuan at a local Starbucks and informed him that she had found his mother's body inside a suitcase by the sea, but she hadn't informed the police. She was willing to get rid of it if Yuan paid up. Although Yuan denied any connection to his mother's death and wanted to get away, the officer further insisted that she was going to give him 2 days to think about it. If not, she was going to the police. Yuan called her up that night to accede to her demands. In the next meeting, she introduced him to 2 more undercover cops, who told him that getting rid of a body was easy enough for them, provided he gave them money. They claimed that one of their team members was dying from cancer, and could be the fall guy if all the details of the murder were supplied to them. But Yuan had no money to give them, so he made a shocking proposal. He said if they killed his father, he'd inherit everything, and then he could pay them. The undercover cops agreed to his plan as well, but demanded to know the details. Yuan fell for this well-planned trap and began to tell them the entire story. Yuan was the only son of the couple, Tang Juehe and Lianji Gua, from Foshan. They ran a successful business with an annual turnover of 10 million yen. Lianji's strong character was an asset to the business. However, she also had a need to control things, especially when it came to her son. She was what could be called a tiger mom. Every detail of Yuan's life, be it career planning or love life, was scrutinized by Lianji. She was responsible for Yuan's breakup with his high school sweetheart, as she had an ordinary family background. Lianji controlled the family's wealth and she kept a tight rein on Yuan's pocket money. In February 2006, then 19-year-old Yuan was sent to Canada by his parents against his will to pursue a higher education. He was to study hotel management at Douglas Community College so that he might build his own identity in Canada and extend the family business. Yuan felt lonely in a foreign country with no desire to pursue business and feeling oppressed by his mother's control. Yuan felt manipulated and coerced by their emotional abuse, and even his classmates complained about his mother. Yuan started lying to his parents using various pretexts to obtain money, which he would spend on gambling or partying instead of studying for his degree. His grades were very poor and not suitable to pursue further education. To pay for his expenses, he worked part-time in the kitchen of a Chinese restaurant in Vancouver despite having a student visa that did not allow him to work in Canada. He earned only $850 per month. Meanwhile, his family in China were completely unaware of his activities. In February 2011, he returned to China to spend the holidays with his family. This time he met a girl. In a very short time span he proposed to her. His mother objected to the marriage and found a more suitable girl for him to marry, according to her standards. This upset him. After graduation, most of his classmates returned to China, and his circle of friends became smaller. He longed to return to China to reunite with his fiancée. He explained to his father that he felt imprisoned in Canada, but his father urged him to push further. His fiancée, meanwhile, became pregnant with what he believed was his child, but then underwent an abortion. This further pushed him toward the edge. In February, his parents visited him in Canada. He rented 2 B&B rooms in Richmond, one for himself and one for his parents. He explained that they could not stay at his place because it was a shared apartment. He also rented a car, claiming that he bought it. He showed his parents around Vancouver, but even then, tensions between them were building. He wanted to be free of them, free to do as he pleased with his life. At some point, Yuan found a hammer in the B&B toolbox and stashed it inside his backpack. On the morning of June 7th, upon realizing that his father had not yet woken up, Yuan spread some coins on his bed and called his mother to his room on the pretext of helping him clean it up. When Lianji knelt to clean it, he hit her on the head with a hammer. When she started struggling, he covered her head with a sheet and struck twice more to ensure she was dead. After killing his mother, his mind raced. He wondered whether he should kill his father too. However, after a few minutes he decided not to go through with it, fearing that suspicion could fall on him if the two of them disappeared at the same time. After convincing his father to return to China, Yuan returned to the B&B to clean up his mess. After getting rid of the evidence, it was time for Yuan to get into the role of the good son. Yuan put up the facade of a concerned son and reported her missing. After he was done telling his story to the undercover officers, he reenacted the whole incident, not knowing his performance was being recorded. His secret was about to blow up in his face. At this point, investigators had more evidence than they could have ever expected. Yet they decided to take it slow and gather more evidence against Yuan to corroborate his story. It did not take long to track down the rented car with traces of blood inside. They also found evidence of burn stains and blood from the storage room of Yuan's apartment. On September 7, 2012, Yuan Jitang was formally arrested for the murder of his mother exactly 3 months after her disappearance. In addition to the murder charge, he faced additional charges of plotting to kill his father. Although he tried to deny everything, he eventually confessed once all the evidence was presented before him, including the video evidence he had unknowingly given undercover agents. Life turned upside down for Tang Zuihei in the blink of an eye when the news broke in China about Yuan's arrest, which prompted his immediate return to Canada. He couldn't believe that his son was capable of murdering his own mother. Yuan, on the other hand, showed no remorse. He went on to say that he had no regrets about what he did. "She's been holding me back, not just controlling me a little. These are my parents and will control me for life. People are going to die. It doesn't matter if it's sooner or later." It was later discovered that Yuan had been planning to kill his parents for a long time. He waited for them to come to Canada because this country had no death penalty. He was also skeptical if Canadian police would be capable enough to solve a crime so twisted. As it turned out, he overestimated his intellect as much as he underestimated Canadian law enforcement. Shockingly, despite Yuan's horrific deeds and plotting, Tang Zuihei stood by his son during the trial. He not only forgave him, but invested a lot of his fortune in Yuan's legal aid. His reasoning: he already lost his wife and couldn't afford to lose his only son too, despite all of his wrongdoings. In one of many jail visits with Yuan, he stated, "No matter how wrong you are, I will forgive you. Your mother is gone. If you die, I don't want to live." Somehow, Tang Zue, he was certain that his wife would understand his reasoning while watching over them from heaven. In court, while testifying as a prosecution witness, he begged for leniency for his son, saying that Yuan was a good man before their strict parenting ruined everything. However, the court seemed to differ as they found him guilty after a lengthy trial. Finally, on February 2, 2015, the Supreme Court of Canada handed down the sentence of life in prison to Yuan Jitong for the second-degree murder of his mother and attempted murder of his father, with parole eligibility after 17 years. This complex case of control and betrayal remains one of the most controversial and disheartening in recent Canadian history. In the end, the culprit faced justice, but a family was forever destroyed. Born on July 4, 1980 in Erkelenz, Germany, Nicole was raised by her mother, Angelika Tegelmeier. Nicole was allegedly the product of an extramarital affair. A year after her birth, a paternity test proved that a married man from the same village was her biological father. Nicole never shared a relationship with her father, though. A few months later, Angelika met musician Ad van der Hoek. 2 years after meeting, they married and moved to Eindhoven in the Netherlands. Together, Angelika and Ad raised Nicole and his son, Andy, from another marriage. It was a well-blended family, but the marriage would not last long. Nicole's mother, Angelika, suffered from severe mental health issues. She often isolated herself from her family and suffered from bouts of depression. Angelika and Ad divorced in 1989 when Nicole was 8 years old. Ad, however, filed for primary custody of Nicole, citing that Angelika would be unfit to raise their daughter. He was awarded full custody and raised both Andy and Nicole. However, being a musician meant Ad traveled frequently, and Nicole and Andy lived primarily with Ad's mother, their grandmother. Due to Angelika's mental health issues, she and Nicole did not share a mother-daughter relationship in the traditional sense. After a while, Nicole's dad met another woman, a fellow musician named Jolanda van der Weyden. She seemed to get along pretty well with the family, and soon Jolanda and Ad married. Both being musicians, Jolanda and Ad were often still on the road touring, leaving both Andy and Nicole to be raised by their grandmother in Eindhoven. Nicole was very close to her grandmother and did not mind this. Tragedy, though, followed Nicole. After Ad's remarriage, Angelika, who still loved him, fell into a depression despite the help she'd been receiving. In April 1995, Angelika committed suicide when Nicole was around 14 years old. Nicole was devastated by the news. She'd lost the chance to repair her relationship with her mother. However, her family and friends stepped in and did not allow Nicole to fall into a depressive spell that could see her spiraling dangerously out of control like her mother. Ad spent as much time comforting Nicole as he could. Her friends too stepped in and became the support group she needed. She eventually put her mind to focus and got herself a job at a nearby bakery in Wanstel. Keeping herself busy kept her mind away from intrusive thoughts. Her family and friends said she was overall a good person, trustworthy, and very responsible. It was these personality traits that raised the alarm. On October 6, 1995, Nicole left her grandmother's house at around 5 a.m. and cycled to work. This was her everyday route, and she never missed a shift without good reason. So when Nicole failed to show up for work, her manager and the bakery owner called the police to report her missing. Police then contacted her grandmother and father, but they, too, hadn't seen Nicole and said she had left for work as per the usual. Police launched an immediate search, canvassing the area and asking people if they'd seen Nicole or her bike in the immediate vicinity. Scouring the surrounding area, it wasn't until later that same evening that Nicole's bicycle was found along the bank of the Dommel River. Sadly, there was no trace of Nicole or her belongings. Looking into Nicole's background, investigators started to believe that Nicole, like other teenagers sometimes do, simply ran away from home. She did suffer a great loss and still had extended family in Germany. Her father, Ad, however, said that it was highly unlikely as she had not shown any signs of rebelling or wanting to leave. The search continued, and on October 19, 1995, her backpack was found near the Eindhoven Canal. Investigators continued to receive numerous tips totaling nearly 300 leads. Then things changed on October 24, 1995, when a man called the police station claiming to know the identity of the person who killed Nicole. The call cut off abruptly before it could be traced and left investigators with more questions than answers. This flipped the course of the investigation on end. Police now continuously interviewed Nicole's friends and family, poring over all the evidence they had in order to catch a break in the case. Nicole's stepmother, Yolanda, allegedly contacted psychics as the frustration of Nicole's disappearance weighed on everyone involved. They were told to concentrate on 2 canals. Using search and rescue police dogs, investigators conducted a thorough walkthrough of the alleged areas Nicole may have possibly gone to, but there was just no trace of her. All this changed on November 22, 1995. A hiker who was passing by the woods between the towns of Mirlo and Leroux discovered human remains. He ran to the nearby town and informed local authorities of his discovery. The police arrived on the scene and already suspected who the remains belonged to. After forensic testing, the remains were identified as Nicole van den Hurk, ending the search in tragedy. An autopsy revealed that Nicole had suffered 2 fractures to the jaw and injuries to her head and fingers. She had also been raped and was stabbed by a small knife that broke her rib and ultimately caused her death due to internal bleeding. Her family was devastated even more so when they were told that there was no evidence to help identify her killer. Nicole's funeral was held on November 28, 1995, and was attended by over 1,000 mourners who wanted to pay their last respects to the beautiful blonde teen. This was only the beginning of a long journey to justice. Her boyfriend at the time was interviewed, but being a minor, his name and photo had not been released, and he was cleared after no evidence could be found linking him to her murder. Police also tried another angle by broadcasting the phone call made by the anonymous man on national television in January 1996, hoping someone would recognize the voice and come forward. Unfortunately, though, this tactic did not bear any fruit. The case was getting cold fast until police discovered yet another lead. A friend of the Van den Hurk family, Celine Hartogs, was arrested and detained in Miami in February 1996 for drug trafficking. During her questioning, she told police that the men she had been working for allegedly murdered Nicole. She further claimed that because of her knowledge of the crime, she was forced to be a drug mule in order to save her own life. Initially, Ad himself believed the girl and supported her claims, but over time, her stories became a bit more whimsical. Police questioned her further and were soon able to whittle away at the lies and discovered her story was flawed. She had just been trying to shave off prison time from her own sentence. Ad also distanced himself from the story and continued to search for answers in Nicole's death. Police pulled out all the stops and brought both Ad and Andy in for questioning between May 1996 regarding Nicole's murder. It was a small town, and people were shocked when police began looking into family members as possible persons of interest. They had been a close family, and the locals didn't believe either man could be responsible. Following hours of interrogations, both Ad and Andy were cleared and released after investigators could find no evidence linking them back to Nicole's murder. Despite the steadily growing reward being offered for information regarding Nicole's murder, no relevant leads came through. Slowly, the case grew colder, and the number of investigators working on it dwindled. In February 2004, another team of cold case detectives took a crack at the investigation. But once again, none of their leads panned out. Nicole's death remained unsolved, gathering cobwebs as the years went by without any new information. The years passed, and things did not get any easier for the family. Nicole's death particularly affected Andy, who was just 5 years older and shared a close bond with his stepsister. Having lost both Angelica and Nicole in such tragic ways, Andy developed psychological problems. He turned to alcohol and often fought against depression. He'd also been distancing himself from his family since Nicole's murder and eventually relocated to England away from the reminder and the memories of Nicole and the tragedy they suffered. Ad remained in the Netherlands, putting focus into his music career and praying for a miracle that would lead to uncovering the truth behind Nicole's murder. Eventually, though, Ad and Yolanda too split up and went their separate ways. Ad moved to Spain but kept in contact with Andy through phone calls. However, they were emotionally drained after Nicole's untimely demise, and their relationship became strained over time as well. Andy's strange behavior came to a heated end on March 8, 2011. On Facebook, he posted, "I will be arrested today for the murder of my sister. I confessed and I will get in contact soon." In mere moments, his comment was shared over 1,000 times. He was immediately arrested by British police and once again made a similar confession while in custody. This confession led to Andy being extradited back to the Netherlands to stand trial for the murder of Nicole. Once back in the Netherlands, Andy was detained in jail and not allowed contact with anyone, including his family. It created a major twist in the case, but the only problem was that there was no evidence apart from the Facebook confession. Police interviewed Ad about his son's confession. Surprisingly, Ad didn't believe Andy was telling the truth. He believed that Andy was just seeking some time in the spotlight after the attention generated by Nicole's case. Yolanda too was interviewed following this major twist but didn't have much to offer in the way of evidence. She said that there had to be an ulterior motive for Andy's vicious crime. Yolanda did not believe that Andy could have done something like this with no apparent reason, but had no idea what the reason could possibly be. But this was only the first shocking statement made by Andy. Soon after he was released due to insufficient evidence, Andy made another damning accusation. He told police that he did not, in fact, kill his sister but needed to reignite the focus on her case after so many years. That's when he dropped another bombshell. He told police that he'd been keeping a secret that was eating away at him from inside. He knew who killed Nicole, his father, Ade. Andy went on to make serious allegations against Ad, claiming that he'd raped Nicole and she'd become pregnant. In order to cover up his crimes, Andy claimed, then killed her to keep it a secret. Dumbfounded by Andy's accusations, Ad said he could not believe that Andy would think he was responsible for Nicole's murder. Andy said that he loved Nicole as if she were his own daughter and never wished any harm upon her. These accusations added to the fact that both Ad and Andy were, at one point in the investigation, persons of interest, led authorities to exhume Nicole's body to conduct further DNA testing. On September 9, 2011, Nicole's body was exhumed and sent off to the Netherlands Forensic Institute. The whiplash created by Andy's confessions put added scrutiny on investigators to leave no stone unturned until they got to the bottom of the case. During the examination, 3 different DNA profiles were compiled from a single trace of sperm. The case was therefore reopened at the February with scientists turning to forensic specialists from New Zealand. With the help of the Institute of Environmental Science and Research Facility, ESR, based in Auckland, New Zealand, scientists were able to separate and test the different DNA samples found on Nicole's body. Afterwards, a mathematical and statistical approach was used to determine a true positive match based on which DNA profile appeared more prominently over the other. The 3 DNA samples were identified as male, and now it was up to Dutch investigators to go back and test the results against those of the suspects, which included Ad and Andy. One of the samples belonged to Nicole's then-boyfriend, who was ruled out due to a solid alibi from previous interviews. The second profile was allegedly unknown. However, in some reports it was said to be Andy's. Police never confirmed those reports. The third profile yielded some interesting results. On January 14, 2014, 46-year-old Jos de G was arrested at his home in Helmand, a city in Eindhoven. Finding his DNA on Nicole could have meant anything, but police were not giving up so easily. After a lengthy interrogation, investigators learned from Deji that on the day of Nicole's disappearance, he'd had an argument with a girlfriend before storming out of the house. Investigators placed the clues together and believed that Deji may have seen Nicole on her way to work and, in that moment of anger, unleashed his frustration on the young woman. These may have just been a theory, but Deji did have a history. DG was previously convicted of 3 sexually motivated crimes. This first incident involved a 20-year-old woman who was violently raped after DG grabbed her off her bicycle and took her to a remote area to carry out the crime. This scenario was similar to Nicole's in every way apart from the stabbing. The second 2 incidents involved an ex-girlfriend whom he'd sexually abused in her own home. It was also noted that DG suffered from mental health problems and had been institutionalized and received psychiatric treatment. The discovery of the new suspect meant that Andy had been playing a very dangerous game. After DG's name was added to the investigation, Andy confessed that the entire Facebook post and accusations leveled against his father were a publicity stunt to reopen the investigation. Since Nicole's death, Andy had been developing a plan and making inquiries about DNA testing and exhumation. He had, over the years, approached police regarding what it would take to get the investigators to exhume and retest the DNA that he believed would be found on Nicole's body. For him, it was time to act as technological advancements had improved since her murder back in 1995. Destroying his own reputation was a risk he was willing to take if it meant justice for his sister whom he loved so much. Andy knew he had to be convincing enough, given all the red tape behind exhumation policies, and had to give investigators a solid enough reason to retest the evidence. It was a gamble that paid off, and people started to call Andy a hero for taking such a risk. However, the shock of it all was not easily forgotten by his father, Ad, and their relationship suffered some strain. But it had got the man they now believed killed their beloved Nicole to trial. The case first went to court in April 2014 and would begin another round of twists as it progressed. DG's lawyer disputed the DNA evidence, citing other DNA profiles were also gathered investigation from Nicole's exhumed body. He insisted that any of the other male profiles could belong to the killer. He further argued that Nicole and Dajie could have had a consensual sexual relationship. Nicole had other sexual partners and may have also been pregnant at the time of her death. The prosecution countered the allegations stating that Nicole had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Dajie, they said, had still been furious from a fight with his girlfriend when he'd come across Nicole. They did concede that there was no motive for killing Nicole other than her being a victim of opportunity in which Dajie could unleash all of his pent-up anger. The defense stuck to their claims of the other DNA profiles belonging to the real killer. DG's trial for the manslaughter and rape charges began in November 2, 2015. The prosecution brought forward 2 witnesses who claimed Dajie confessed to killing the girl. However, Dajie's defense team argued that the witnesses had been institutionalized along with Dajie at the time and were just confessing in order to cash in on the €15,000 reward that was being offered for more information. The defense further argued that DNA was poorly stored and pushed for samples to be reanalyzed. The court conceded, despite the prosecution arguing it was a delay tactic. The tests were carried out once again by a new forensics team. This delayed the trial to the next year. And in April 2016, the new forensics team presented the results confirming that the most likely suspect was, in fact, DG. On October 12, 2016, the trial resumed with all the new evidence in place. It was to be a very painful process for the family. The prosecution argued that DG would be sentenced to 14 years in prison for the manslaughter and rape of Nicole, as the accused DG could not possibly have had a consensual relationship with Nicole given his background, stating that she would not have willingly developed a relationship with him. After much deliberation and the fact that 2 DNA tests conducted by separate teams pointed to DG as the most probable suspect, on October 9, 2018, DG's acquittal was overturned, and he was sentenced to 12 years for the rape and manslaughter of Nicole. Following the conviction, life mostly returned to normal for the Van den Hurk family. Both Andy and Anne were proven innocent through DNA results, allowing them to breathe a sigh of relief. Andy returned to England and tried to live out the rest of his days as normally as he could. In May 2022, though, there would be another dramatic end. Neighbors of Andy started to notice his absence and requested a welfare check by police. Upon arrival, police knocked, but with no response, they were forced to break down the door and enter his apartment. Greeted with a foul stench, police ventured into the bedroom and found Andy dead on his bed. Near his body were numerous bottles of alcohol and prescription drugs. It was later determined that Andy committed suicide when toxicology reports proved that the excess amounts of alcohol and drugs caused him to have a heart attack. Investigators determined that given the stress of Nicole's murder and the subsequent search for justice, Andy could not handle the reality of it all. They believe he eventually succumbed to his depression given his history of mental health struggles. And this marked the end of Andy van den Hurk's tragic yet unusually heroic tale. a man many say loved his sister beyond measure. So much so that he risked his own reputation and freedom to solve the mystery of her murder. Not only did he help solve Nicole's murder, but he also helped investigators remove a dangerous criminal from society. Arushi Talwar was born on May 24, 1994 to her loving parents Dr. Rajesh and Dr. Nupur Talwar. Both parents were dentists who practiced at a clinic they shared with another dentist couple, as well as the Fortis Hospital where Rajesh was the head of the dental department. Additionally, Dr. Rajesh also taught at the ITS College of Dentistry. All those who knew Arushi described her as a kind, pretty girl who had many friends and was always happy and carefree. She was known to be a huge fan of the Bollywood star Shah Rukh Khan. When she saw him in a commercial, she would say to her friends, "I wish I could jump into the TV and marry him right now." She was shy, but she did have one secret desire that she confided in friends. "I want to become famous." She was a student at the Delhi public school and was well loved by her friends in school who had nothing bad to say about her. At home too, as the only child of the dentist couple, she was doted on by her parents. The Talwars seemed to be the perfect representation of a happy, loving family. Living along with them in their apartment in Sector 25 of Noida was Yam Prasad Banjati, better known as Hemraj, who was the live and domestic help and cook for the Talwars. He was not Indian but came from Nepal and belonged to the Darapani village in the Arga Kangshi district. Everything seemed to be perfect in the life of Arushi and the Talwars. She was happy, doing well in school, and had many friends who loved her. Her parents' business was successful and the family was fairly well off. It all seemed too good to be true, and it turns out it was. On the night of May 15, 2008, less than 10 days before Arushi's 14th birthday, a heart-wrenching tragedy struck the Talwar household and it would never be the same again. A 14-year-old girl, Arushi Talwar, was murdered in the home of her parents. Her throat slit. May 15, 2008 was a normal day in the Talwar household by all accounts. Rajesh taught at the ITS Dental College from 8:45 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. before treating patients at his clinic till 8:30 p.m. Nupur treated patients at the clinic from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. and then picked Arushi up from school at 1:30 p.m. and returned home to their apartment with her. They then were joined for lunch by Nupur's sister-in-law, Vandana, the wife of Rajesh's brother Dinesh. Nupur and Vandana left after lunch while Arushi remained at home. Nupur worked at Fortis Hospital from 4:30 to 7 p.m. before returning to the apartment around 7:30 p.m. Rajesh arrived home soon after around 9:30 p.m. and was dropped off by his driver Umesh Sharma. When Umesh came to the apartment at 9:40 p.m. after parking the car nearby to hand over Rajesh's bag and the keys of the car to Hemraj, he saw Nupur and Arushi at the dining table and Rajesh coming out of his room. He was the last person outside the home to see Arushi alive. After eating dinner, which Hemraj had prepared for the family, the Talwar stated that they went to Arushi's room where they gave her a Sony DSCW-130 digital camera as an early birthday present. And the courier had come in the morning. "We had ordered a camera for her." Rajesh said, "No. Let's give it to her on the 24th. And I said, it's her birthday party. 3 days she can take pictures." The camera had arrived by courier earlier that day. And despite Rajesh wanting to wait for Arushi's birthday to give it to her, he was persuaded by Nupur to present it to her that night as an early birthday surprise. Arushi took several photographs of herself and her parents, the last one being recorded at 10:10 p.m. Afterward, her parents retired to their room for the night while Arushi remained in her own room. Around 11 p.m., Rajesh asked Nupur to go turn on the Wi-Fi, and because the router was in Arushi's room, she had to enter it again. According to Nupur, when she did, Arushi was fine and was reading Chetan Bhagat's The 3 Mistakes of My Life. Nupur says she returned to her own room after switching off the router. Around this time, Rajesh answered a call on the landline which indicated the ringer was on. He then served some dentistry sites and his stock portfolio until 11:41 p.m., which was the last time his laptop showed internet usage. However, the last use of the internet router was at 12:08 a.m. At around midnight, and Mal, a friend of Arushi's, called her cell phone. When she didn't answer, he tried the house's landline, But again there was no answer, which was strange as Rajesh had used it only an hour ago when he answered his call. He then sent her a text message at around 12:30 a.m., but this never reached her phone. The exact events after this time remain unclear, and investigators are still unsure as to what exactly happened between 12 and 6 a.m. in the Talwar household. However, the events of the next morning have been very well documented. On the morning of May 16, 2008, the family's housemaid, Barrett Mandel, rang the doorbell of the apartment at around 6 a.m. She had only been employed by the family for about 6 days, and usually, Hemraj would open the door for her in the morning, as Nupur and Rajesh tended to sleep in a bit longer. However, this morning, no one opened the door even when she rang the bell twice. Confused, she tried to push on the outermost door as it sometimes jammed shut, but it did not budge. When she rang the bell a third time, Nupur opened the innermost door. She then told Barrett that the middle grill door was locked from the outside and explained that Hemraj had probably locked it from the outside when he went to purchase milk for the morning. She initially asked Barrett to wait outside until Hemraj returned, but Barrett did not want to wait, so she said she'd go downstairs so Nupur could throw her the keys for the gate from the balcony. Nupur then called Hemraj's phone to see where he was, but the call was cut off. When she tried to call him again, his phone appeared to be switched off. In this time Barrett had gone downstairs and Noopur called out for her to check if the door was only latched, not locked. But Barrett insisted she throw down the keys anyways so she'd not have to take the stairs again, and Nupur did so. While this was happening, Rajesh too had awoken and left the bedroom. When he entered the living room, he saw a nearly empty whiskey bottle on the dining room table with bloodstains on it, which worried him. He asked Nupur who had left the bottle there, and when she did not know, in a state of panic he asked her to check Arushi's room. The door of Arushi's room was self-locking and could only be opened from the outside with a key when shut. But that morning the door was left slightly ajar and unlocked. When they entered, what they saw left them shocked to their cores. Arushi was lying on her bed with her throat slit. There was blood on the bed, walls, and floor. Her body had been covered with a white flannel blanket, and a school bag had been placed over her face to cover the injuries on it. Rajesh started screaming in panic, while Nupur remained quiet in stunned silence out of the pure shock at what she was seeing. Meanwhile, Barrett returned to the outermost gate. She pushed it and it opened without the key. She found that the middle door was latched but not locked. She opened the latch and walked in. On entering the apartment, she saw that both Rajesh and Nupur were in tears. Rajesh loudly accused the missing hemorrhage in front of her, exclaiming, "See what hemorrhage has done." She was then shown Arushi's body and room by Nupur, but did not enter it. Unsure of what to do and how to console the grieving parents, she rushed out of the house and informed the neighbors as to what had happened. The Talwars too called their family and friends to tell them of the tragedy that had befallen them. In all of this, the police were not informed until Punish Ray Tandon, a neighbor who lived one floor below the Talwars, asked the apartment security guard, Virendra Singh, to inform the police. The upstate police arrived at the house by 6:50 a.m. on the morning of May 16th. But by the time they'd arrived, the crime scene was in absolute chaos. Neighbors, close friends, and relatives had all arrived, having been called by the Talwars who told them of the murder. Over 20 people were present in the living area and the Talwars' bedroom. They had completely trampled upon the crime scene, destroying any and all traces of evidence that the police could have used in their investigation. Only Arushi's bedroom had been left vacant, and this is where the most evidence would be recovered from. The two officers who led the investigation that day were Investigating Officer Dataram Nanya and Superintendent of Police Mahesh Mishra. However, the state police made a crucial mistake. They failed to cordon off the crime scene and did not ask all of the additional people to leave immediately. Many people were still roaming in the apartment freely. Additionally, around 8 a.m., a large number of reporters and media persons arrived at the apartment, having heard about the murder that had taken place in the affluent neighborhood. In a shocking display of negligence, the police failed to keep even the media off the property, and they too were present in the apartment when the forensic team later arrived. According to the CBI team, 90% of the evidence at the crime scene was destroyed due to the state police's failure to follow proper procedure in securing it. The fact that this case remains unsolved even today can, in some part, be blamed on these actions. Arushi's room was where the forensic team was able to gather the most evidence, as this room had not been disturbed by the outsiders and press as much as the rest of the house. Arushi's body was found lying on the bed covered with a white flannel blanket, and her own school bag had been used to cover her face. There was blood found on her pillow, the bed, the walls, the floor, and the bedroom door. However, no blood was found on the stuffed toys, the school bag, or the pink pillow that were all on her bed. All these items lay within range of the blood splatter area, but had no blood stains on them, indicating they were placed on the bed after her murder, probably by her killer. Her bed sheet was laid out smoothly, showing no signs of struggle. A circular watermark was found below her pelvic area on the sheet, but her visibly untied pajamas did not have any such wet patch. This indicates that the pajamas were likely pulled up after her body was wiped clean. As the forensics team scoured the house for any possible evidence, the police collected statements from the parents as well as some of the other individuals present in the house. In his statement, Rajesh adamantly blamed Hemraj for the murder. He even went so far as to tell the police to stop wasting time in the apartment and offered them 25,000 rupees to rush to Hemraj's native village in Nepal. From his statement, and due to Hemraj being missing, the police believed that it was an open and shut case, as a senior officer at the team told the Talwars. Their theory at the time was that he'd consumed the whiskey from the bottle on the table, and then in a drunken state had tried to enter Arushi's room to assault her. When she resisted, he hit her with the blunt edge of his kukri, a traditional Nepali knife, before cutting her throat and escaping. The police announced a 20,000 rupee reward for anyone with useful information that could lead to Hemraj's capture. At around 8:30 a.m., Arushi's body was taken for an autopsy to see if any other evidence could be found. A part of Arushi's blood-stained mattress was cut out and sent to the forensics lab along with her pillow, bedsheet, and clothes. Vikas Sethi, a pharmacist who worked with the Talwars, later stated that he, along with 3 other individuals, had wanted to dump the remaining part of the mattress on the terrace but found it locked. When they asked Rajesh for the key to the terrace, he disappeared for a long time and then later told them he could not find the key. As they did not want to break down the door, the men threw the mattress on the neighboring terrace. Arushi's body returned home at 1 p.m. on May 16th. The body was brought home and laid on ice slabs in the living room. It was taken for cremation at 4 p.m. on the same day after the police confirmed that the body was not needed for any further examination. According to the Talwars, who were later accused of being in a hurry to cremate the body, it was decomposing fast and the family elders were pushing for cremation. The police later also said that the Talwar staff were very hasty in cleaning Arushi's room. In the Talwar's defense, their pharmacist, Vikas Sethi, told the court that he had received permission to clean the house from the police personnel and a lady constable present at the crime scene. According to the CBI, when the post-mortem report was being written between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. on May 16th, a series of telephone conversations took place between Dinesh Talwar, Dr. Sushil Chowdhury, Dinesh's friend and the chairman of the iCare Eye Hospital, and K.K. Gautam, retired deputy superintendent of police. K.K. Gautam, while deposing at the CBI court later in February 2012, stated that Chowdhury had requested that he get any references to a sexual assault removed from the post-mortem report, but he refused to oblige. At the end of the day on May 16th, the police were sure that Hemraj was the murderer and believed that if they found him, they would have their man. They therefore neglected to look deeper into certain matters that they should have examined more closely. The next day, on May 17th, the Talwars left for Haridwar to immerse Arushi's ashes in the Ganges River as per the Hindu custom. While they were gone, visitors continued to pour into their household, which was being managed by Dinesh, to offer their condolences. One of these visitors was retired police officer K.K. Gautam, who had been asked by one of the couple's friends to come to the house. When he arrived at the house, Gautam examined the rooms of Arushi and Hemraj. He was then shown the bloodstains on the terrace door handle by Dinesh. Dinesh asked him if he could get the terrace door unlocked. Gautam then called SP, Superintendent of Police, Mahesh Mishra, who was in charge of the investigation, and told him that the lock needed to be broken. Mishra promised that he'd pay a visit to the crime scene himself and in the meantime, sent the station officer, Dataram Nanaria, to the apartment. The key to the terrace was still missing. In the end, Dataram Nunaria broke the lock and the group went on to the terrace for the first time since the murder. The first thing they saw were the bloody track marks as if a body had been dragged across the terrace. Then, to their horror, they saw a body lying in a pool of blood. It had been there for so long that it was no longer recognizable in its advanced stage of decomposition. They also found a smudged bloody handprint on the wall of the terrace and a bloody footprint from a size 8 or 9 shoe. A double bed cover had been draped across the iron grill that separated the Talwar's terrace from the neighboring terrace where Arushi's mattress had been dumped the previous day. Dinesh Talwar couldn't identify the body, so he called Rajesh and Nupur, who were on their way to Hurdvar, and asked them to come home. When the couple returned to the home, Nupur didn't enter the house. Instead, she sat in the car with Arushi's ashes as she considered it inauspicious to take the ashes inside. Rajesh was the one who went upstairs to identify the body. He told the police that he couldn't be sure that the body was that of Hemraj due to the injuries and the decomposition. Rajesh and Nupur then resumed their journey to Hurdvar to immerse their daughter's ashes. Later, a friend of Hemraj identified the body as his. An autopsy of Hemraj's body was conducted that night by Dr. Naresh Raj. Not much information is available about Hemraj himself except that he was from the Darpani village in the Agrakanchi district of Nepal and had been recommended to the Talwars by a friend of his. He regularly sent back money to his family in Nepal from his earnings. The discovery of Hemraj's body greatly embarrassed the police as they had initially focused their attention solely on him as the murderer. The police were also criticized for other investigative blunders, such as not cordoning off the crime scene. The investigating officer, Dataram Naniria, was transferred on May 17. The next day, Superintendent of Police Mahesh Mishra was also transferred. After this, the angle of the investigation drastically changed. The autopsies conducted on both Arushi and Hemraj presented police with new evidence which they could use to form theories as a part of their investigations. The autopsy on Arushi found that the cause of death for her was not the slitting of the throat but rather the blow to her head by a blunt object that had killed her before her throat was cut. The blunt injury was on Arushi's forehead above the left eye. The blow caused a deep cut around 1.5 inches by 1 inch and a blood clot about 3 inches by 3/4 of an inch in her brain. The incision on Arushi's neck measured 5.5 inches by 2.25 inches. Her blood drained from the neck wounds, but there was no arterial spurting, which indicated that these wounds were inflicted on her after the blunt injuries had already stopped her heart. The February 2008 post-mortem report of Arushi was written by Dr. Sunil Doer. In it, he said that Arushi's genital area had nothing abnormal detected. Thus, sexual assault was ruled out as a possibility. But at the same time, he also noted the presence of a whitish discharge at her vagina. The sample was sent for examination at the local district hospital, which reported an absence of, however. When this vaginal swab sample was sent to CBI's forensic labs, it was suspected to have been tampered with. In a shocking discovery, it was discovered later that Arushi's vaginal swabs that were sent to be tested at the Center for DNA Fingerprinting and Diagnostics in Hyderabad did not match her blood samples, which basically meant that the swabs did not belong to her. The CBI conducted a raid on the Noida District Hospital only to find that Arushi's original medical file, her pathology reports, and autopsy findings were all missing, thus ensuring that vital clues that could have led to the murderer or murderers were lost forever. The CBI could not establish whether the sample was switched in the hospital or at the police station. Later in February 2012, Dr. Doer gave a different statement saying that Arushi's privates were extraordinarily dilated, although they showed no signs of sexual assault. He also stated that her vaginal orifice was unduly large. The mouth of her cervix was visible and the whitish discharge was only in the vagina where it should have spread to the entire area. He said he did not mention these observations in his original report because they were subjective findings and because the findings were nonspecific and were very strange. He added that the wide opening could only have formed if someone manipulated it while the rigor mortis was setting in. He therefore concluded that Arushi's private parts appeared to have been cleaned after she died. These findings, along with the alleged tampering of the samples, would appear as if someone wanted to erase evidence that could have pointed towards sexual assault. Unfortunately, the police were never able to determine whether this evidence was in fact legitimate or who had tampered with the samples. Hemraj's body provided much less evidence upon autopsy, mainly due to the state of decomposition. His body had been found almost 2 days after he'd been killed. However, from an analysis of the terrace and the rest of the apartment, police were able to determine that his blood was only present on the terrace. This indicated that he had been killed there. But even with that, the drag marks on the terrace were consistent with what would have been made by a body being dragged on a bedsheet. So again, the police could not be sure of this. Unlike Arushi's body, which was found with undigested food in her stomach, Hemraj had just 25 milliliters of liquid in his, indicating that he did not have dinner. This evidence was backed up by the fact that his dinner was found untouched in the kitchen on the morning of May 16th. The results of both autopsies stated that the time of death for both victims was between the hours of 12 a.m. and 6 a.m. on May 16th. Therefore, the fact that Hemraj's dinner was untouched was surprising, as usually he would have eaten before this time and had indeed served himself around 10:30 p.m. the previous night. Why had he not eaten when he regularly did? Amongst various other clues, one major thing that perplexed investigators was the doors and the keys. The door to Hemraj's room was locked from the inside. The keys to the main entrance were also found in his room. The duplicate set of keys was with Rajesh and Nupur in their bedroom. In this scenario, the only way the keys could have been found inside Hemraj's room after the mesh door was locked from the outside was if the keys were brought in through Hemraj's room and then the key was locked from the inside. Since Hemraj and Arushi were both murdered, this allowed for only 3 possibilities. 1. Either one or both of the Talwars were involved in the murder. 2. Either one or both of them allowed the murderer or murderers to exit and then collected the keys from them. Or 3. There was another set of keys that so far had not been mentioned by anyone related to the case. Another strange piece of evidence the police uncovered was when they went through Arushi's phone records. In the 2 weeks prior to her murder, her last recorded usage of her phone on each night was never earlier than 11:20 p.m. In fact, on most nights, her last recorded usage was well past midnight. However, on the night of her murder, she last used her phone at 9:10 p.m. Why did she not use it again on this particular night? Was she aware that something was going to happen? We can only speculate. The whiskey bottle that was found on the dining room table in the morning had been removed from a concealed bar that the Talwars had in the living area. The fact that the bar was hidden meant that whoever removed it knew the house well. The bottle was covered with blood stains of both Arushi and Hemraj, but sadly, no fingerprints could be recovered from it. Otherwise, it could have been a key piece of evidence into the investigation. From the details mentioned up until now, it must already be clear just how complex and convoluted this case was. Beginning with a lack of uncontaminated evidence to the tampering of what little was available, the authorities investigating had an uphill battle from the very beginning. Add to that the fact that the case received widespread media coverage. The press were ruthless in bringing up accusations against everyone involved, even the deceased. The case quickly spun out of control. Over the next few years, the case would be investigated by multiple teams from different agencies, but none would be able to come up with a clear conclusion as to who had done this. In the first few days after Hemraj's body was discovered, police suspected the Talwar's former domestic help, Vishnu Sharma, was behind the murders. He was replaced by Hemraj, who he himself had recommended to the Talwars. Police believed he'd killed him for taking his job, and Arushi may have been killed for being a witness. They named him as a suspect on May 19th and took him into custody but lacked any tangible evidence to connect him to the murders. His alibi was established and it was confirmed that he was in Nepal at the time the murders took place. He was released from police custody and investigators were again at square one scrambling for new leads. On May 21st, Delhi police joined the UP police in the investigation. By this time, the police as well as the media had begun to suspect foul play on the parents' part for multiple reasons. This included the fact that Arushi's bedroom was right next to her parents', yet they claimed to have slept through the murders without hearing any noise. Another reason was that Arushi's room was generally locked from the inside and the only key to it was by Noaper's bedside. Yet the morning after the murder, the key was in the living room and they had no answer as to how it got there. Rajesh encouraging the police to pursue Hemraj before his body was discovered was thought to be a diversionary tactic by the police and only increased their suspicions. The fact he ignored the police's request for the key to the terrace door only added to this. Arushi's body and the crime scene in her bedroom had been cleaned, with her stuffed toys being placed on her bed and her bag being placed over her head after she was killed. The police could not find any motive for an outsider to have done this. And finally, the phone calls Rajesh's brother Dinesh had made to try and remove all mentions of sexual assault from the autopsy report also raised suspicions. All of these reasons gave the police cause to suspect the Talwars, and they were about to be given one more that led them to arrest Rajesh. They were told by one of his employees that he was allegedly having an affair with Anita Durrani, the wife of the dentist couple that the Talwar shared their clinic with. Inspector General Gurdarshan Singh, who was leading the investigation at this time, speculated on scenarios that could have led to the murders. His theory was that Hemraj knew about the alleged affair and was blackmailing Rajesh. Rajesh took Hemraj to the terrace on the pretext of discussing the issue but ended up killing him. Arushi was a witness to this act and also objected to her father's affair, and she was killed to ensure her silence. Another theory he floated at the time was that Arushi was aware of her father's affair and confided in Hemraj and may have even entered a relationship with him. On the night of the murder, Rajesh had entered Arushi's room late at night, where he found Arushi and Hemraj in an objectionable though not compromising position. Seeing this, he took Hemraj to the terrace and killed him and then came back downstairs. He then drank the whiskey in the bottle found on the table and then in a drunken state killed his daughter. On May 23rd, Rajesh and Nupur were taken to the police lines area where they were separated. When Nupur was kept in a room with a female constable, Rajesh was arrested and taken to a local magistrate and subsequently to Dasna jail. Rajesh later claimed that the magistrate did not allow him to make any phone calls, and police threatened them into signing a confession on the way to the jail. Since it was Friday, Rajesh could not apply for bail until Monday. He had to spend the weekend in jail. He later stated that the police again threatened him to sign the confession while he was in their custody. After this, public opinion began to turn against the Talwars. Many of their friends began to avoid them. The Fortis Hospital fired Rajesh from his position as head of the dental department. However, the members of the Indian Dental Association and former patients professed their belief in Rajesh's innocence. Additionally, Arushi's friends and relatives were enraged by the character assassination taking place against the Talwars as well as the deceased Arushi. Their names were being dragged through the mud by the press as well as by police authorities who were making claims without any evidence. Renuka Chowdhury, the Minister for Women and Child Development, demanded the suspension of Inspector General Singh for the accusations he had made against Arushi without any proof. Singh was transferred a month later. On May 31st, the case was transferred to the Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI, per the request of the Talwars, who stated that the police were trying to frame them to cover up the fact that they'd botched the investigation. In June, the CBI started investigating the case under Joint Director Arun Kumar. The Talwars provided counter-arguments against the points that had led them to being suspects. They said that both rooms had the air conditioner on since it was a hot summer night, and the noise from these units was the reason they were able to sleep through the murders. Neopur stated she may have left the key to Arushi's room in the door when she went to turn on the Wi-Fi router the previous night, which could be how the murderer entered the room. Rajesh also stated that he urged the police to pursue Hemraj because, being missing, he was the obvious suspect. He also claimed to not remember the police asking him for the keys to the terrace door. Rajesh's brother denied asking KK Gautam to use his influence to change the post-mortem report. He claimed that CBI could not find any record of him making calls to the post-mortem house. Since the crime scene was compromised and evidence was lacking, the CBI turned to polygraph and brain mapping tests. Both Rajesh and Nupur took and passed 2 polygraphs and a brain mapping test. No evidence of deception on their part was found. Subjected to polygraph test twice. Again, in the first polygraph test remained inconclusive. There's no conclusion drawn. And in the second polygraph test, no deception has been found in her responses. Following this, the CBI began to look into other possible leads and suspects. In the next phase of the investigation, the CBI began to look at 3 individuals, all employed by the Talwars, and friends of Hemraj who could have been the killers. According to the Talwars, the claims about Rajesh's extramarital affair and an affair between Arushi and Hemraj were both planted by Krishna Tadarai, an assistant at the Talwar's dental clinic. Rajesh stated that 2 days prior to the murders, he had scolded Tadarai for making an incorrect dental cast. This was supported by Anita Durrani. Rajesh's driver, Umesh Sharma, stated that he had heard Tadaraj and Hemraj talking loudly in Nepali while in the car. When he inquired as to what they were talking about, Tadaraj told him that he would deal with Rajesh. On June 7th, Tadaraj was detained by the CBI. The CBI team searched his house where they found a blood-stained pillow cover and cutlery knife. He then underwent a number of tests, including a polygraph test and a narco-analysis test. In a narco test, the subject is given narcotics which put them in a semi-conscious state in which their ability to lie is greatly hindered. However, these tests are not admissible as evidence in court as they're not always reliable. During his narco test, Tadarai spoke of a second murderer. Based on this, the CBI began investigating his friend Rajkumar, who was the domestic help for the Juranis, the couple that ran the clinic alongside the Talwars. Between June, Rajkumar was also subjected to a number of the same tests as Tadarai. He was then arrested on suspicion on June 27th. On June 30th, Vijay Mundal, another friend of Tadarai, was reported as a suspect in the media. Mundal was a driver and domestic help for Talwar's neighbor, Punish Tandon. Hemraj, Tadarai, and Rajkumar were all of Nepali origin and had been recruited through Vishnu, the ex-servant of the Talwars who was the initial suspect in the case. On July 9th, Rajkumar was put through a second narco-analysis test, and the next day the media reported that he had confessed to the murders. On July 11th, Vijay Mundal, who was already being investigated, was also arrested. That same day, lead investigator Arun Kumar gave a press conference in which he said the case was still unsolved, but it seemed like Tadaraj, Rajkumar, and Mandel were the prime suspects based on the narco tests. However, the narco tests on their own were not enough for conviction, as there were many differences between the statements the men had given during their respective tests. Tadaraj himself had given 3 different versions of the story. Based on the statements of the men, the CBI built this timeline of events. Hemraj had invited all 3 to his quarters that night, and the men arrived around midnight. The 4 men started drinking beer. Tadarai spoke of his humiliation by Rajesh Talwar and expressed his desire to take revenge. Arushi's door was surprisingly unlocked that night. But from this point, each statement was different in what they said had happened. Here's what the men said. In Rajkumar's version, Arushi threatened to expose what the suspects said about her father, so Tadarai took out his kukri and killed her. Then when the suspects planned to flee, Hemraj got cold feet and threatened to expose them. Tadarai and Rajkumar then dragged Hemraj to the terrace and killed him, after they destroyed the mobile phones of Arushi and Hemraj. In Tadaraj's first version of events, he stated that he and Rajkumar had entered Arushi's room and tried to sexually assault her, and when she'd resisted, Tadaraj himself took out his kukri and killed her. They then dragged Hemraj to the terrace and killed him because he was a witness. In Tadarai's second version of events, he stated that it was Rajkumar and Mandel who entered Arushi's room and tried to assault her. When she resisted, Mandel hit her on the head and Rajkumar slit his throat with a kukri. The 3 of them then took Hemraj to the terrace and killed him before escaping off the roof after locking the terrace door. In Tadaraj's third version of events, he stated that Rajkumar entered and tried to assault Arushi, while he and Mandel followed him. When she resisted, Tadaraj killed her with his kukri. Hemraj then got scared and threatened to tell the Talwars, so the 3 men took him to the terrace and killed him. The 3 of them then returned downstairs and tried to enter the Talwar's room but found it locked. While these statements do perhaps indicate some form of guilt, the CBI could not use them as evidence and eventually had to release all 3 men for a number of reasons. Firstly, all 3 men had alibis. Tadarai's family and landlord confirmed that he was at home the night of the murders. Vijay Mundal's employer also confirmed that he was in his garage the night the murders took place. Rajkumar was the only one whose alibi was only confirmed till 12:30 a.m. on the night of the murders. Secondly, no physical evidence could be found tying the men to the scene of the crime. Their fingerprints did not match any lifted from the scene, and the bloody kukri found in Tadarai's room turned out to be animal blood, not human. And finally, the narco tests alone were not considered sufficient evidence to be used for conviction as they were inadmissible in court. Additionally, Rajkumar's lawyer Naresh Yadav approached the National Human Rights Commission, NHRC, stating that the three men had been tortured by the CBI officers during the investigation. In January 2009, the CBI announced that they were ready to file charges against Tadarai, Rajkumar, and Mundal. However, in the absence of any hard evidence, they could not do so. Arun Kumar's time at the CBI ended in September 2009. A new CBI team was given the case that same month. This new team was headed by the SP, Superintendent of Police, Nilab Kishore. An additional SP, AGL Call served as the investigating officer. The new CBI team looked at the entire crime again with fresh eyes. For them, the parents were once again the prime suspects. Apart from the oddities discovered in previous investigation into the couple, they also found some additional points of interest. Both doctors who conducted the autopsies on Arushi and Hemraj gave new statements containing new information. Dr. Dewar stated that Arushi's hymen was ruptured, and her private parts appeared to have been cleaned. Dr. Naresh Raj stated that Hemraj's swollen private parts indicated the possibility of sexual intercourse. In October 2009, the CBI conducted another analysis of the crime scene based on the photographs that had been taken, and the analysis supported the theory that the crime scene had been cleaned and staged after the murders. Most importantly, the new team identified the weapon that had been used to inflict the blunt injuries as a golf club. Specifically, one of the clubs in the set owned by Rajesh himself. On October 29, 2009, the CBI asked Rajesh to send his golf set to them, and he complied the very next day, sending them over. The CBI later stated that the dimensions of the golf club bearing number 5 were identical to the dimensions of the injuries on the heads of both victims. It seemed they had found their murder weapon. But because it was over a year later, no evidence was found on the club to link it to the murders. Nilab Kishore once again questioned the Talwars in his Dehradun office on May 18 and 19 of 2010. A few days later, a story appeared in the Pioneer newspaper stating that Arushi had been killed by Rajesh in an honor killing. This article quoted unnamed sources in the CBI. On July 21, Rajesh asked the court to pass an order of restraint against the unethical and misleading information being published by the print media outlets. On December 29, 2010, the CBI filed a closure report recommending that the case be closed due to insufficient evidence but naming Rajesh as the sole suspect. In the report, they stated that the parents were the only people who had a reason and ability to clean up the crime scene. They also officially cleared Tadaraj, Rajkumar, and Mundal, stating that all three had alibis and there was no evidence linking them to the crime. They ruled out any other outside intruders as there were no signs of forced entry, and an intruder would have no reason to clean up the crime scene and hide Hemraj's body. Finally, they stated the complete lack of physical evidence they had found at the crime scene as insufficient to continue the investigation. It was recommended that the case be closed for good. In January 2011, the Talwars filed a petition protesting the closure of the case with Rajesh as the sole suspect. However, their petition was rejected by the magistrate Preeti Singh of the Special CBI Court in Ghaziabad. On February, she turned the closure report into a charge sheet and summoned Rajesh and Nupur as the accused to come and stand before the court. The Talwars petitioned both the Allahabad High Court and then the Supreme Court against being summoned and proceedings being initiated against them. However, both courts rejected their pleas. Their formal trial began on May 11, 2013. In the trial, the parents were accused of destroying evidence, misleading investigators, filing wrongful petitions to the court as well as the two murders. On November 25, 2013, the Special CBI Court held Rajesh and Nupur Talwar as guilty for both murders along with the other charges that were leveled against them. The next day, on November 26, they were sentenced to life imprisonment for the double murders. The Talwar family were outraged and called the verdict a miscarriage of justice. In January 2014, they raised an appeal against the decision in the Allahabad High Court. Subsequently, a long and weary legal battle dragged on for over 3 years. On October 12, 2017, the High Court acquitted the Talwars of all charges, stating that the evidence against them was insufficient. Due to this, It was ruled that they should be given the benefit of the doubt and should not be convicted based solely on suspicions. Hemraj's wife and brother in Nepal were highly critical of the verdict, and they continue to believe that the Talwars are guilty. On March 8, 2018, the CBI challenged the acquittal in the Supreme Court. And on August 10, 2018, the Supreme Court accepted the appeal. The trial is yet to begin. Guilty until proven innocent? Steven Avery's story has captured the attention of millions, with many divided over his guilty conviction. Was an innocent man framed, or did prison break him and make him a murderer? The subject of the compelling true crime documentary, Making a Murderer, created a stir internationally. The documentary follows the case of Steven Avery, a man freed after a wrongful conviction, only to be charged with murder 2 years later. For the Halbach family, a reminder that nightmares can filter into reality. For Teresa Halbach, October 31, 2005, was another day at the office. As a freelance photographer working for Auto Trader magazine at the time, she received a call to shoot a few photos of the Avery's auto salvage. She was never seen again. First reported as a missing person on November 3, 2005, a large-scale search began for Teresa. On the afternoon of November 5, 2005, her Toyota RAV4 SUV was found partially concealed in Avery's salvage yard. Investigators later discovered blood in the vehicle. Charred bone fragments and teeth were also found in a burn pit on the same property. Her car keys were in the room of the property owner, Steven Avery. Born on March 22, 1980, Teresa was one of 5 siblings. Her parents, Richard and Karen, raised her on the family dairy farm. When she was 8 years old, her father sadly passed away. Karen eventually remarried Richard's brother Thomas, and together they raised their blended family. Teresa was an outdoorsy girl who aspired to work for National Geographic as a photojournalist. Friends described her as having an uncanny ability to make everyone feel welcomed. She was dedicated to her studies, making summa cum laude with a degree in photography. After graduating from the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, Teresa continued to work with Pierce Photography, whom she interned with during her college days. She started her own business, Photography by Teresa, and operated out of the Pierce studio. She traveled extensively, and to supplement her income, she took on freelance jobs for Auto Trader magazine, taking pictures of vehicles that were put up for sale. It was this job that led to her untimely death. All the evidence found pointed to one person, Steven Avery. Avery had contacted Teresa to set up an appointment to take pictures of his sister's minivan. According to records, she was last seen at 2:30 p.m. that afternoon. This was later confirmed by Steven's nephew, Bobby, who told police he saw the car enter the salvage yard. Avery was initially charged with a weapons violation as a convicted felon. On November 11, 2005, he was formally charged with the murder of Teresa, kidnapping, sexual assault, and mutilation of a corpse. The blood found in the SUV proved a positive match for Avery's. A set of car keys belonging to Teresa found in Avery's room. All the while, Avery maintained his innocence, alleging the police were trying to frame him. He was in the middle of a civil lawsuit with Manitowoc County for $36 million. Steven Avery, born July 9, 1962, is a Manitowoc County native, raised in Wisconsin alongside his 2 brothers, Charles and Earl, and sister Barbara by parents Dolores and Alan. He dropped out of high school, with reports suggesting he had an IQ of 70. Steven was no stranger to the law. In 1981, he served 10 months in jail following the burglary of a bar. A year later, he pleaded guilty to animal cruelty after pouring gasoline on his pet cat and tossing it into a bonfire. For this, he served another 9 months. In 1985, he threatened his cousin Sharon Morris by forcing her off the road and thereafter pointing a gun at her. He later alleged that he wanted her to stop spreading rumors. She had filed a report alleging that he exposed himself on several occasions and was in the front yard. Although he received a 6-year sentence for his crime, he was granted bail and released. However, it was a case of mistaken identity that had him locked away for nearly 2 decades. Penny Bierniston reported that she had been walking along a beach near 2 Rivers when she was attacked and assaulted on July 29, 1985. Police believe the description she gave had a striking resemblance to Avery. She went on to choose his photo during an interview with police and later picked him out during a suspect lineup. He was arrested and charged with the attack on Bjornstam. A state-appointed forensic official claimed that a hair found on Avery's shirt was consistent with the victim's. This evidence led to his conviction in December 1985. All this despite a staggering 16 witness testimonies and a time-stamped receipt to prove his whereabouts at the time of the assault. Stephen was convicted of rape and attempted murder and sentenced to 32 years in prison. Avery maintained his innocence and appealed in both 1987 and 1996. Both appeals were denied by the higher court. In February 2001, though, Stephen made contact with the Wisconsin Innocence Project. The organization took on the case, and in February 2002, Stephen was exonerated after DNA evidence proved he was innocent. It was later learned that another man, Gregory Allen, committed the crime and did, in fact, confess to it in 1995. Deputies alleged that Sheriff Deputy Thomas Koch-Eric received a call and said, "We already have the right guy. Don't concern yourself with it." Allen and Steve bore a striking resemblance. Allen also committed a similar crime in the same area that Bjornstam was attacked and was under police surveillance, but he was not considered a suspect. Allen was not even called up as a suspect in the lineup. After 18 years, Stephen walked out a free man on September 11, 2003. He then went to file a civil lawsuit against former Sheriff Thomas Korkerneck and former District Attorney Dennis Vogel to the tune of $36 million as freedom. However, wouldn't last long. When Teresa was reported missing, searches were conducted in the salvage yard. This was the place she'd last been seen, as confirmed by Stephen's nephew, Bobby Dassey. Stephen claimed that he had spoken to Teresa when she came by to take the photos, and then she left. Apart from the bone fragments, SUV, car keys, and blood found in the car, a bullet with Teresa's DNA was discovered in the garage. While incarcerated for Teresa's murder, Stephen's lawsuit was settled in February 2006, and he was paid a mere $400,000 while in jail. Stephen's younger nephew, Brenton Dassey, was also questioned in relation to the murder. Brendan, who was 16 years old at the time of the murder, was interrogated by police without parental supervision or a lawyer being present. Brendan confessed to investigators that he and Stephen first assaulted Teresa before murdering her. They then burned her body to destroy evidence. "I grabbed her arm, put it on the side and tied it up. Clutter. Cover where? On a throat." He was charged in March 2006 as an accessory to the murder. He later recanted his statement, claiming that he'd been coerced by detectives. Brendan was charged with the same crimes as Stephen, although there was no physical evidence linking him to the crime scene. Stephen was convicted in March 2007 and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Later that same year, Brendan, too, was found guilty and given a life sentence with the possibility of parole in 2048. But there was not to be a cut and dry solution to the murder. The conviction sparked controversy. It was a sensational case. Stephen was the first of the Innocent Project's 174 exonerated convicts to be charged with a violent crime after being released. This caught the interest of aspiring filmmakers Laura Ricciardi and Moira Demos. Making a Murderer premiered on Netflix in February 2015 and created a media maelstrom. The documentary, which took 10 years to research and produce, profiled the case of Stephen Avery. The series chronicles the case timeline beginning with Stephen's wrongful conviction in 1985 and subsequent exoneration, civil lawsuit against the Manitowoc County, and the arrest of Stephen and Brendan in regard to the murder of Teresa Halbach. It received both praise and criticism from critics and those directly involved with Teresa's case. The stir it caused on an international level has driven to division in public opinion. A petition to have Stephen and Brendan pardoned was drawn up and sent to the White House. It garnered over 128,000 signatures but still failed to make any impact. The White House stated, as the convictions were made in a state court, the president had no authority to pardon either defendant. There are those who firmly support the innocence of Stephen and Brendan. These include his immediate family who have supported him and also pray for the real killer of Teresa to be found. Sandy Greenman, Stephen's ex-fiancée, is one such person. Greenman has been his avid supporter, going as far as to start a Facebook page to garner support and give exposure to the case. She described him as a model inmate. Greenman stated that people take a perverse pleasure in tainting Stephen's name. People like to say Stephen Avery has been violent all his life, which is not true, she said. Most notably, though, was the support offered by Kim Kardashian. The socialite has been using her influence to advocate for a fair justice system. Having come across the case on a social media site, her interest was piqued. Although she has made appeals to the governor, even her level of influence has no sway. However, she hasn't given up and hopes to seek justice for both Stephen and Brendan. The other half feels Stephen is where he belongs. On that side of the coin is Jody Stokowski, another ex-fiancé. Jody initially pledged her support in Stephen's innocence during the documentary. Afterwards, she alleged that she had lied and it was all an act. Jody went on to explain to Nancy Grace in an interview that he threatened to kill her and her family. The first thing I'm going to ask you is, do you believe Stephen Avery killed Teresa Halbach? Yes, I do. Why? Because he threatened to kill me and my family and a friend of mine. He alleged that he wanted revenge on all women after his life was wrongfully stolen from him. Stephen is the one person I can't trust. He's a monster, she said. The show also ignited a debate regarding the perspective covered by the documentary. For the supporters of Stephen and Brandon, they feel the points most significant to the trial were highlighted. Dean Strang, one of Stephen's attorneys, agreed that the documentary covered enough to give the public a chance to judge for themselves. He disagreed that the series was subjective. As for the relatives of Teresa, they say the show saddened them. The Hallbacks stated the show sought to entertain and seek profit from their loss. Teresa's aunt, Kay Jordana, and cousin-in-law, Jeremy Fournier, both stated that the show was one-sided. Former Calumet County District Attorney Ken Krantz alleges he was not given a chance to tell his side of the story. The filmmakers denied this and claimed that he refused to give an interview. In an interview with People magazine, Krantz alleges the documentary has left out key pieces of evidence. These include Stephen using a fake name when calling Teresa, DNA belonging to Stephen was found on the SUV's hood latch, and a ballistics report showed that the bullet found in the garage was fired from a rifle owned by Stephen. Krantz further alleges that prior to her murder, Teresa had once before made a trip to the Avery residence. When Stephen answered the door with only a towel on, she said she wouldn't go back because she was scared of him. In response to criticism from Krantz and other officials, the filmmakers said they had given prosecutors the opportunity to answer questions. They believed that the documentary was a fair representation of the case and covered the most consequential evidence given during the trial. The documentary had its desired effect. It poked holes into the narrative of Stephen and Brendan's case by exposing allegations of police and prosecutorial misconduct, evidence tampering, and witness coercion. At the outset, Stephen called out the police for trying to frame him. This to avoid the county paying out the $36 million lawsuit he filed. Stephen believed his lawsuit would be undermined if he was convicted of another violent crime. To avoid a conflict of interest, Manitowoc County gave neighboring Calumet County authority over the handling of the case. Part of the deal, however, was that Calumet could use resources which included personnel from Manitowoc. The key in Stephen's room was found by Manitowoc Sheriff's deputy after several searches of the property. Another allegation made was regarding the blood evidence found in the car. Stephen and his defense team believe it was blood used from his prior conviction. Giving credence to this scenario were the claims made by the defense. According to the Avery defense team, the vial containing Stephen's blood had been tampered with and a puncture hole was visible on the stopper. The prosecution, however, combated this claim by testing the blood for a preservative not found in fresh human blood and found none. Avery's defense team brought in an expert witness who stated it was not possible to tell if the negative result meant there was none of the preservative present or the technology to test itself was inconclusive. The documentary shone a spotlight on the manner of interrogation with regard to Brandon Dassey. Dassey was just 16 years old during the interrogation. Firstly, he was interviewed without the supervision of a lawyer or parent. It's understood that both he and his mother consented to the interrogation. But what piqued the interest of many was that Brandon had an IQ of 73, classifying him as intellectually challenged. Many have argued that his intellectual disability left him open to suggestion, particularly when it was shown that the Reed technique of interrogation was used. The Reed technique has been criticized for producing high rates of false confessions, especially from juveniles and the mentally impaired. The technique is used to make the suspect comfortable and eventually confess to crimes through familiarity with the interrogators. The interrogator then proceeds to tell the suspect that the evidence shows that the suspect did commit the crime. Dassey allegedly agrees with the interrogators during the interviews, but later recanted his confession. He accused his first defense team of collaborating with the prosecution to get him to confess. "You and Steve had this planned?" "Yeah." "Yes or no?" "Yeah." He's also claimed that coercion was used to elicit a confession from him. Both Stephen and Brendan have appealed their convictions, but have been denied innumerable times and remain in prison. The defense teams of both men have exhausted their efforts in trying to get retrials on both men's charges. Following the making a murder documentary and the public outcry regarding Stephen and Brendan's innocence, significant new developments have occurred in both their legal teams. Professors Laura Nyrider and Stephen Dreisen of the Northwestern University Center on Wrongful Convictions of Youth are representing Brendan. They too began with numerous appeals and have come up against many hurdles, but have refused to give up just yet. Meanwhile, Stephen's appointment of Kathleen Zellner has shaken up the case and given further hits to the prosecution's claims. His previous lawyers, Dean Strang and Jerry Buting, have taken their newfound fame and gone on tour to promote and bring attention to the case of Stephen Avery. Zellner, considered a trailblazing trial lawyer, has been responsible for overturning 19 wrongful convictions. Her dogged determination and careful analysis of cases has seen her uncover missing evidence that helped exonerate her clients. Most recently notable, she was a consultant for Johnny Depp and his defense team during his trial. Zellner hit the ground running when she was appointed to Stephen's defense team and firmly believes her client is innocent. One of the first things she put to rest was the alleged confession of Joseph Evans Jr. Evans alleged he was responsible for killing Teresa and trying to frame Stephen. Zellner stated that it was a not-so-subtle attempt at publicity. Previously, Evans played Smitch and allegedly wrote a 9-page letter to media outlets claiming he heard Stephen confess to the murder. This time, though, it seems he wanted in on a portion of reward money to make his life in prison more comfortable. However, his claim is not gaining the traction he expected. In August 2016, Zellner filed a motion demanding new scientific testing be done. Willing to pay for the extensive testing, Zellner intended to use this evidence to prove that Stephen had been framed. The theory was that 3 different burn pits showed evidence of human remains being burned. A particularly significant find was that of a human pelvic bone fragment, a bone that was given to the hall box as part of Teresa's remains. This action, claimed Zellner, was proof that Teresa's remains were planted in Stephen's burn pit. The defense, however, didn't get the opportunity to test these bones as they were not disclosed to them. This was a Brady violation according to Zellner, meaning that evidence which could have helped exonerate Stephen was not disclosed in the proper manner with regards to the criminal case. Crucial evidence was just out of their reach. Zellner remained relentless in her pursuit for justice. She approached the case with a new angle, one that could potentially point to a new suspect in the case. Being unable to test the bone fragments, Zellner opted for forensic testing of the Dassey family computer. What she found on it was damning. Pornographic images of women in various stages of torture, violent images and videos depicting women as victims. All these images were allegedly accessed at times when Bobby Dassey was at home. Furthermore, Zellner pointed out that Barbara, Bobby, and Brendan's mother, along with Stephen's sister and her husband, Stott Todick, were trying to get rid of evidence that could implicate Bobby. The forensic team were able to download 2,449 pages of data from the computer to a CD-ROM to present as part of the motion for a retrial. On it were all the searches, videos, and photos accessed by Bobby. Bobby is the older brother of Brendan and the nephew of Stephen. He was also the key eyewitness for the prosecution at Stephen's trial. He alleged that he last saw Teresa going to his uncle's house and when he returned from hunting that afternoon, did not see her or the car again. Added to these claims are the allegations of his half-brother, Brad Dacey. Brad is alleged to have said he believes his uncle is innocent. He also made claims that his stepmother, Barb, and Stephen's brother-in-law, Scott, wiped the computer, deleting all pornographic material. Allegedly, Barb has filed a harassment suit against Brad following a conversation they had about tracing deleted files from a computer, which some believe is, in part, to ensure Brad remains silent about his knowledge. For Bobby, though, the final nail in his coffin could be the evidence that exonerates Stephen and, in turn, Brendan. An eyewitness has come forward claiming to have seen Bobby being assisted by a much older man, pushing Teresa's SUV back into the salvage yard. Thomas Sawinski stated in a sworn affidavit that he drove by Bobby and the other man while en route to deliver newspapers. When he passed the duo a second time, Bobby allegedly stepped out in front of his car to stop him. Thomas swerved to avoid him and continued on his morning route. He said that Bobby's eyes showed he was not pleased to see him there. Following the discovery of the SUV, Thomas realized the significance of the find and contacted police. He told them everything he'd seen that morning, and their response was, "We already know who did it." He provided his details, but he never heard back from them. For Zellner, this provides a contradiction to the prosecution's key witness. If proven true, which she is confident about, Bobby's testimony would be false. Zellner believes the rejection of all the crucial evidence in favor of Stephen denied him a fair chance to prove his innocence years ago. The newly filed motion is still with the appeals court and is awaiting an opinion or decision to be read over in November 2022. Stephen Avery continues to maintain his innocence. Kathleen Zellner, in her own words, says she represents the wrongfully convicted and added, "If you lie to her, she will find you out." Brian Michael Barrett was born on February 1984 to parents Dan and Deb Barrett in Williamsville, New York. His two younger brothers, Daniel and Richard, soon followed. Growing up, Brian was a very shy and quiet person. To those who knew him, he was very easygoing and kind. He had an avid passion for sports, a hobby that began at an early age. He even regularly read the newspaper's sports section to keep track of the statistics for all of his favorite teams. He shared his love of sports with his dad and his brothers, with whom he had a close bond. Brian played both baseball and football in high school until a shoulder injury prevented him from returning to the field. In February 2002, Brian graduated from Star Point High School in Pendleton, a rural town in New York near the Canadian border where Brian lived with his family. After completing high school, he decided to get his 2-year degree at Erie Community College. While studying there, he took a part-time job with Dynabrade Corporation in the town of Clarence to pay for his college. Once he finished the degree, he decided to become an industrial arts teacher. With the aspiration of being a teacher, Brian registered at Buffalo State College nearby his home. However, he continued his part-time factory job where he was known as a hard worker. In February 2006, at the age of 22, Brian finally started to come out of his shell and even began to exhibit an adventurous streak. He spent his time fishing, camping, skydiving, and trying new things. However, one of the things he was exploring did not include any outdoor stunts. Like many young people, Brian also loved spending time on his computer, sometimes talking to strangers. But nothing could have prepared him for what his online encounters would eventually lead to. On Friday, September 17, 2006, Brian's shift at the Dynabrade power tool plant ended at 10 p.m. After packing up his things, he climbed into his truck to head home. But before he could slip his key into the ignition, someone shot him at close range with a .30 caliber rifle. 3 bullets exploded from the driver's side window, striking him in the left arm and the neck, resulting in instant death. His body was found 2 days later when a coworker spotted his pickup truck in an isolated part of the company parking lot. His lifeless body was still seated in the front seat of his truck. As police began their investigation, they quickly learned about a possible suspect in the slaying. Apparently, Brian's coworkers began telling officials about his supposed online love triangle and the animosity with a coworker of his. To get to the bottom of the story, investigators combed through his online activities. As they dug deeper, a shocking story was unveiled. It was a story of jealousy and betrayal that ended in a tragedy. It all starts with 46-year-old Thomas Montgomery, a Cheektowaga man who was living a regular life with his wife Cindy and their 2 daughters. He worked as a machinist for the Dynabrade Corporation, the same factory where Brian worked. But his life was nothing close to Brian's. For 12 years straight, this man woke up in the morning, then went on to work at the Dynabrade factory. He strapped on his goggles and stood at his machine until the late afternoon, churning out components for power tools. After work, he took his 2 daughters to the local swimming club and walked the family dog, Shadow. Every day he got up and played the role of a hard-working father and husband yet, aside from poker nights with his buddies and the Dynabrade euchre tournament, he enjoyed nothing about his life. At 46, he was trying to overcome the monotony of his daily routine. That might explain why Montgomery, a 46-year-old former Marine with a reddish mustache, bulging gut, and balding head, decided to become someone else. In February, posting as a young, handsome, Iraq-bound Marine, he entered a teen chat room on the popular game site Pogo.com with the screen name Marine Sniper. Almost instantly, an 18-year-old girl with the screen name Tall Hot Blonde started messaging him, so he decided to pretend he was 18 too. After a few friendly chats, the girl let him know that her real name was Jessie, a softball-playing high school senior from West Virginia. She sent Montgomery photos that lived up to her screen name. In return, Montgomery said his real name was Tommy. Tommy stood 6 foot 2 inches tall, the same height as the 46-year-old man, but the similarities ended there. Tommy had thick red hair, broad shoulders, and big muscles, with a handsome face. He was a black belt in karate with bullet scars on his left shoulder and right leg portraying his toughness. Montgomery sent Jessie a picture of him in uniform, taken 30 years prior from the brief time he served in the military. Montgomery also created an elaborate ruse about this persona. As Tommy, he told Jessie that his mother died of cancer when he was 12, and his father was in the military. After living a tough life, he enlisted in the Marines. After a boot camp in June to train as a sniper, he was headed to Iraq. Marine Sniper was nostalgic to Montgomery, reminiscing about the 6 years spent in the Marine as a young man. However, U.S. Marine records showed that although he qualified as a sharpshooter, he never trained as a sniper or saw action. However, the story managed to draw Jessie in. Although their chats started as friends, before long the flirtation became a full-fledged online romance. Jessie kept sending her photos to Montgomery, believing him to be an 18-year-old. Some of those photos were very provocative. Over time, the relationship had evolved, and they were engaging in cybersex. To Montgomery, it became more real for him than real life. The feelings seemed to be mutual. Jessie and Tommy started exchanging gifts, phone calls, and love letters. At one point, Jessie even sent a pair of red underwear in the mail as a gift. Although Montgomery knew that the affair was getting serious, he couldn't sever ties with her. Assuming they would never meet, he decided to play cat and mouse. If I was smart, I would have just ended it, but it was like a drug that I needed every day, Montgomery later said in an interview. As time went on, Jessie and Tommy had settled into a routine, talking by phone between 6:30 and 6:40 a.m., and from 3:30 to 3:40 p.m., when Jessie was led to believe that her Marine love was off duty. About 8 months after they met online, during Christmas, Tommy proposed marriage and Jessie accepted, all of this without ever meeting in real life. His fantasy did not stop at the computer screen, however. He began telling people at his work about this 18-year-old beautiful girl he was imagining a life with. He told them that he planned to leave his wife and move to West Virginia. And he was not even joking. In a note to himself he wrote, on January 2, 2006, Tom Montgomery, 46 years old, ceases to exist and is replaced by an 18-year-old battle-scarred Marine. He is moving to West Virginia to be with the love of his life. While Montgomery seemed to be losing touch with reality, his lies fell apart when his wife, Cindy, learned about the whole ordeal. One day in February 2006, Jessie messaged Montgomery while his daughter happened to be working on the computer. Shocked to see their conversation, the girl alerted her mother. Cindy was already suspicious about his long hours online and his dwindling involvement in their life, and now everything made sense. She also found a bunch of love letters, photos, and mementos from Jessie, including the pair of red panties. To warn her, Cindy sent Jessie a photo of her family with a letter. "Let me introduce you to these people," she wrote. "The man in the center is Tom, my husband since 1989. He's 46 years old." She further advised her, "Do not trust words on a computer. Let this go. You'll only be hurt by a man who has mastered the art of manipulations and lies." With total transparency, she also confronted her husband with a letter. "I cannot believe you are living some sort of bizarre fantasy. If you want to separate, we can, but to continue to lie to me and the kids while she is sending you gifts in the mail is not acceptable." Horrified and heartbroken by this revelation, Jessie immediately broke off the relationship. Calling Montgomery a liar, she said that she hated him and he should be put in jail for this charade. But in her mind, Jessie could not believe it. To make sure, Jessie reached out to one of Montgomery's co-workers, Brian Barrett, who went by the online handle Beefcake. Brian confirmed the story Cindy had told Jessie. Be it revenge or just disgust, Jessie leaned toward Brian for solace. It did not take long before Jessie and Brian developed their own cyber romance. They even went public about their relationship as it became more intimate. She sent Brian the same pictures she previously sent Montgomery. Their budding relationship was all over the internet forum, but it did not stop at that. At his workplace, Brian boasted about his new love interest and revealed the disturbing actions of Montgomery to fellow co-workers. Both Jessie and Brian took to the internet to make sure that everyone knew that he was a liar and basically presented him as a pedophile. Montgomery was furious with this. In the span of a few days, his life was completely falling apart. He went from a respected community member to a pariah. Jessie's affair with Brian added fuel to his jealousy, especially when Jessie showered praise on Brian. "He's honest. He wasn't a liar like you were," Jessie told him. "He's closer to my age." However, despite her anger, Jessie wasn't able to turn her back completely on Montgomery. After a while, she started messaging him back. "I ache to be with Tommy," Jessie expressed. "If he existed, I would still be holding him every night and sharing dreams with him every night." She also confessed to Montgomery that she had only been with Brian to take revenge on him. This was like a jackpot to Montgomery. He was being accepted despite being 47 now, and he still had the woman of his dreams. But while they did rekindle the relationship, the affair did not last long. Behind his back, Jessie seemed to be taking up with Brian again. Driven by extreme obsession, rage, and jealousy, Montgomery began to go into a downward spiral. This time his texts with Jessie were filled with abuse and threats. At one point he threatened Jessie, saying, "Brian will pay in blood." Despite these threats, Jessie did not cease going back and forth between the two men, which would not end well. The final nail in the coffin was when Brian and Jessie decided to meet, something Montgomery never could. Brian was driving down to North Carolina, and on his way back he asked Jessie to meet him, as he would be driving very near her house. Although Jessie initially agreed, she canceled at the last minute. But Montgomery, unaware that she had canceled, was burning from blind rage. After investigators discovered this trove of evidence, they felt confident that they had their man. And if all these marathon chats were not enough to point to Montgomery as the suspect, he told one of his colleagues that he wouldn't be stupid enough to leave shell casings lying around if he were to kill someone, as was the case in Brian's murder. 2 weeks before the slaying, Montgomery had asked that same employee what time Brian got off work. After figuring out that Montgomery had both motive and opportunity to commit the crime, authorities reached his home. Concerned that he was on the run and possibly planning to hurt Jessie, Buffalo authorities contacted the local police in West Virginia to check on Jessie. When officials from the West Virginia Police Department went to Jessie's home, Jessie wasn't home. Instead, Jessie's mother, 45-year-old Mary Sheeler, opened the door. Investigators had no idea they were in for another surprise. Officers noticed that even after they described the situation, Mary was not concerned, but rather calm. They could not believe what she told them next. As the layers of deceit peeled off one by one, it sent chills down detectives' spines. Under pressure, Mary broke down and confessed that neither Montgomery nor Brian ever talked to Jessie. had been Mary all along. She had taken her daughter's identity and even her email address and entered a teen chat room on Pogo posing as her own daughter. She had also sent provocative pictures to strangers without her daughter's consent. Her daughter, the real Jessie, was completely unaware of her mother's sick fantasies, or that there were photos of her scantily clad spreading throughout the cyber world. There was nothing more tragic than to think that the only person who was telling the truth about his identity was the person who would end up losing his life. On November 27, 2006, Montgomery was arrested for the murder of Brian Barrett. He claimed to have gone to a local restaurant and returned home between 10 and 10:10 p.m. before the murder had taken place. However, according to his wife's testimony, he arrived more than half an hour later. Montgomery's mobile records revealed him to be in the vicinity of Dinah Braid at the time of the murder. Upon questioning, Montgomery claimed that he had to retrieve his lunch from his car, as his peaches would have spoiled otherwise. A peach pit was retrieved next to Brian's truck, which later revealed Montgomery's DNA. A leather cartridge case covered with dog hairs was found in the same area, which was suspected to belong to Shadow. The police uncovered a photo of Montgomery's gun cabinet containing a .30 caliber rifle, which was missing from the cabinet after the murder. Montgomery had no idea that Mary had conned him at the time of questioning. Blood drained from his face once he learned that he threw his life away for a lie. Prosecutors in Buffalo tried to charge Mary Sheeler on any possible count, but it was concluded that she might have crossed moral and ethical lines, but not the legal ones. In September 2006, Montgomery pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter in the death of 22-year-old Brian Barrett. In November 2007, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Lots of petitions were filed by Brian's family for a law to be enacted in New York so that Mary's actions are made illegal in the future. But all of them were in vain. Brian Barrett was murdered by a person pretending to be someone he was not, obsessing over another person pretending to be something she was not. It's saddening to come to terms with the fact that misuse of social media by two fully grown adults resulted in the death of an innocent 22-year-old who was just beginning his life. Lori K. Soares Hacking was born on December 31, 1976. Her biological mother was just a child herself at the age of just 13. She opted to give her daughter up for adoption. For months later, she found her forever family with Thelma and Orlando Soares. The couple were from California and had been eager to bring home a sibling for their adopted 7-year-old son, Paul. They called her their angel baby as she had been the answer to their prayers. Being Mormon missionaries, Thelma and Geraldo raised Lori and Paul in a loving home filled with devotion to their religion and family. Thelma, who learned Portuguese, also taught her children the language in order for them to learn and understand a bit more of their father's Brazilian heritage. However, in 1987, Thelma and Geraldo divorced, having grown apart over the years. Lori would have been just 10 years old at the time. Geraldo continued to live in California along with Paul, who was graduating from high school and would soon go off to do his missionary work. Lori and Thelma, however, moved to Orem, Utah for a fresh start. At first, it was a difficult transition for Lori as she was very close to her father, but time would eventually heal the wounds. It was in Orem that the pieces of Lori's life started to fall into place. She excelled at school and among her friends and family. She was considered a kind-hearted and outgoing young lady. Those that knew and loved her would say she had a way of understanding everyone around her. Her ability to maintain academic excellence while working a part-time job continued throughout her academic career. Lori was the type of person who knew where she was going and had a plan for her life. Part of that plan was meeting her Prince Charming and being able to raise her very own family. Little did she know her own fairy tale would begin on a school camping trip. In 1994, while on a Orem High School seniors camping trip to Lake Powell, Lori met Mark Hacking. Mark was a prankster and had been fooling around with his friends. Without thinking, he tossed a smoldering log back into the fire with his bare hands, accidentally burning himself. Ever the helpful person, Lori came to his aid and treated his wounds before bandaging them up. The rest, as they say, was history. Under the cover of the stars and the dying campfires, Mark and Lori's love story began as they talked late into the night. Soon Laurie would tell her mom all about Mark and never looked at another man in that way again. Being Mormon as well, Mark was about to embark on his missionary work in 1996 at the age of 20. The couple maintained a loving long-distance relationship as Mark went off to Winnipeg, Canada to carry out his duties. However, Mark returned earlier than expected after one of his roommates allegedly broke missionary rules and involved him in the scandal. Laurie stood by him throughout this trying period, and when he returned home they picked up right where they'd left off. Laurie went off to continue her education at Webster State University. After a year, she transferred to the University of Utah and majored in business. During this time, Mark had begun helping out with odd jobs around the neighborhood. In an unfortunate twist of fate, Mark had fallen off a roof and suffered several injuries including a concussion, seizure, and a broken back. This incident led to Laurie and Mark developing a stronger bond where she cared for him as he recovered, thus bringing their relationship full circle. Both of them began planning their future together. Mark enrolled in the University of Utah to begin his undergraduate degree before pursuing his actual dream of a career in medicine. Laurie and Mark were preparing to take a big step forward in their relationship.